in somewhere and I haven't set that up. Yeah, it's recording.
Thank you.
Cool, so I got a few more extras than I thought, which is great, but I'll try and scroll you across. Jean, my name's Ash.
Nice to meet you. Hi.
Have you got your booklet with you?
Yes.
Excellent, and just make sure your space is nice and warm as well.
Yep.
And hi Miriam, so nice to see you. Hope you enjoy hanging out for this course. We were just starting up and Bruce is just leaving to go to somewhere else, but I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Ash. I run Move Mentality, which is the studio where Tensei Gritty is currently running out of through Bruce in Melbourne with my partner Rob. And I teach the somatics component of the Tensei Gritty diploma and have done for the last 2.5 years, because I have also done my somatic movement therapy through Tensei Gritty, which is another course that I did after Pilates, and it just takes this work and expands it beyond anything that you have even imagined. But it's quite amazing because then you learn how to bring it back into your Pilates and use it separately, but also use it in conjunction. But today we're just taking like the tip of the iceberg and we're going to talk for a couple of hours and do a bit of movement for you guys to understand what somatics basically means and what it is. It would be amazing if it's not too hard for people to hear, for you guys to have your sound on, because I think it would be nice for us to be able to communicate and talk together and for you guys to be able to ask questions. But I acknowledge if you've got background noise or it's just not working for you to have the sound, that it might be better to mute yourself. If I can hear that somebody's like shuffling around and it's distracting, I'll try and let you know. So please don't take offense. And I've currently pinned my video. So I think that means even if there is sound, you should be able to see me as the host most of the time. Is that okay for everyone? Cool. So does anybody know what somatics means? Nada? That's all good. Okay, so to break it down from the very beginning, soma, the word soma is the Greek word for body. So when we talk about somatics, we're talking about the study of the body, but from within. So often with a lot of other things, we might study the body from the external world inwards. So from a third person point of view, for example, a physio, an osteo, chiropractor, a Pilates teacher, all of these situations, we are studying someone else's body from the external and making decisions and making adjustments based on that. The difference with somatics is it's about the study of your body from within. So it's actually a very personal practice. And it's a really interesting thing to be a somatic movement therapist, if that's the way you choose to go, because you are actually teaching somebody to take ownership of their own experience. And so you have to walk a very fine line as a leader in that, because you're not really teaching them to listen to you. So you don't want to say too much in that way. You're actually trying to teach them to have confidence and faith in their own ability to sense things in their body and trust those sensations to make decisions. So it's a really nice adjournment to Pilates, because we use Pilates and yoga as well in a mindful way. So you're actually teaching that a little bit. This kind of almost takes it a step further to go, hey, I don't want you to ask me how it looks. I really want you to pay attention to what it feels like and make some decisions and make some discoveries based on that. All good? So somatics is the study of the body from within. And the other thing I just want to clarify before we jump into the slides, because in a minute I'm going to put the slides on, is somatics can be a noun and somatics can be a verb. And I think that's a really confusing part for people. So I just want to make that really clear, in the sense that in this 4 hours, I'm going to teach you Thomas Hanna's somatic exercises and what Thomas Hanna, who is a person, decided about somatics. He originally learned and was very influenced by Feldenkrais. So some of you may have heard of Feldenkrais. And I think what Thomas Hanna did so well is he took everything he learned from Feldenkrais and he distilled it into some very simple exercises that summed up Thomas Hanna's work, even though it actually really was massively influenced by Feldenkrais. Feldenkrais, if any of you know about it, it's also a somatic movement practice and a teaching that you can learn. And I think, forgive me if I'm wrong, but I think it takes about 4 years. you really dedicate yourself to being a Feldenkrais practitioner. And if you know anyone who's a Feldenkrais practitioner, they're very proud of the fact that they're a Feldenkrais practitioner because it's a long time to study. I really like the Thomas Hanna work because it gives me an element of what I could have learned in Feldenkrais, and maybe I will journey there one day, but I also get to use it in Pilates now. And that's something that you guys are going to be able to do by the end of today. So it is a noun in the sense that it is the Thomas Hanna somatic work that we're learning today. And it is a verb in the sense that you can teach anything somatically. You can teach Pilates somatically. You can teach how to ride a bicycle somatically. In fact, you actually do. When people learn to balance on a bicycle, it's because they are paying attention to the internal sensations of their body, not necessarily to instructions that they've been taught from someone else. So somatic learning or somatic teaching is not necessarily about the exercises. And I think that's a really important thing to learn when you're studying your diploma, because you've already got 1,000 exercises to learn with the Pilates work. There's a lot of rep. So when you look at these exercises, they might not be something that land until 6 months down the track, or they might be something you come back to at a later point, but it doesn't mean that you aren't teaching somatically when you teach Pilates. It can be an approach as much as it's about the exercises. Is that okay? Cool. Awesome. So what I'm going to do is open the slides. So forgive me while I share my screen. This will just take a couple of moments. And I'm going to try my best to not just read the slides, because I find that the slides can be pretty like two-dimensional unless you're really, like, even when I was reading them earlier, I was like, they're great, but they just sort of touch on the basics. And there's so much more depth in this work that I'm hoping to explain to you as we go. So somatic education, or the Hanna somatic education specifically, which is what we're working with today, facilitates greater mind-body integration, ease of movement, and freedom in the body. I'm just going to move this. That's pretty self-explanatory, because once you do the exercises, you'll start to see that they are similar to Pilates, pre-Pilates, in the way that they move the body, but there's some distinct differences about why we learn these particular exercises for this module. So as part of the somatic education, you're introduced to the somatic self. And what that really means is that you learn to be more connected to your own physical internal sensations. You become aware of like the heat in your body or the cooling in your body. You just start to develop your understanding of sensation and how to describe that. And that's an amazing thing to take with you today and then teach to your clients, or explain to your clients, because you actually get them to start to describe a little better how they're feeling a little bit more accurately, and that can help you guys work together to really understand what's going on for them. So many of you might have the experience, if you've started SCH, or if you haven't, you will have this experience where people say, I don't know how I feel. I don't know what you mean. Or that you ask them like, does that feel good? I don't know. And it's because they've never been asked that question. They've never had to investigate, does that feel good for my body? Oh, I think somebody's just echoing through.
Yeah, sorry, that's me. I'm just having real problems with my computer, and I'm just trying to get out of my phone now.
Oh, no worries.
Can you hear me, Tracy?
One sec.
Can you hear me?
God. Sorry, guys.
No?
Right. Yeah. Cool.
Oh, leave. There it is. Leave.
All good? Awesome. So I think I was just saying, it gives you the opportunity with your clients to get them to explain a little bit more about how they're feeling, and that just makes your job so much more enjoyable, because it becomes a collaboration between the two of you, instead of you feeling like you have to do all the heavy lifting and guess what's going on for them. So teaching them to understand their body somatically is paramount as part of your Pilates, and this will teach that, but it'll also give you some exercises that we're going to go over today. We're going to go through the theory and the exercises. The overall idea of the Thomas Hanna somatic work is the idea that we have over-contracted muscles and negative movement patterns in our body from living, from being alive over a period in time. And these exercises are specifically designed to go into the contraction and then release the muscle again and return to a new rest. At the moment, that probably sounds a bit confusing, like what are you talking about? Bear with me as we get through this. I'll explain a little bit more about how that process works according to Thomas Hanna. So I guess I'll go from this now in terms of what I mean by chronic muscular patterns and past experiences. We talk in somatics about stresses. I don't mean stresses or stressors in a negative way. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. A stressor is just something. Oh, Bruce, you're right. A stress is just something that happens to you. It can be a really disastrous stressor, like a car accident. That's a really massive one. It can be the fact that you had a terrible conversation with your boss. It can be something that makes you really excited. It's just kind of like as you live, you experience different stresses. Different stimulus is probably a good word. And over time, those experiences, those stresses can create different tension patterns in our bodies, and we're going to go through those. And the problem is not necessarily that they create those tension patterns, because they're a response that we have to the stressor. That's a good thing. The problem is when they get stuck, when we're not able to come out of those responses. And that's when we can have this unconscious retaining of stress in our body, and it shows up as a chronic muscular tension pattern or a contraction pattern. So that's a lot of the work that Thomas Hanna looked at, was how do we release these tension patterns, and how do we return our bodies to vitality so that we don't experience this deterioration of our bodies over time. He named this tendency sensory motor amnesia, or SMA, and it's in your books. I would highly, highly recommend, if you find this interesting, to Google his book. He died in the 90s, which was really devastating, in a car accident, because he'd only just opened up his institute, and I ponder on how much further this work would have gone. It's still pretty, it's out there in the world when you start to look, but I think it could have maybe even gone further with his continual push, because he was a real, all of the practitioners that do somatics are incredible, but I think because he came to it second, he was able to see it in a really analytical way and make it really digestible for people. So I think his work was very powerful, and I feel quite sad that his life was cut short. But his book, which is just called Somatics, I think it's called Somatics Reawakening, and you'll get the rest of the title, is phenomenal. And he actually goes through some case studies of people who he saw who had this sensory motor amnesia and how he brought them out of it. So if you are interested, write that book down, because that was my first experience of somatics. And then when I did my Pilates, this came second, and I was like, I've read this book and it was phenomenal. So I think that book is amazing if you're wanting to learn a bit more. With Hanna Somatics, the principle is that it enables the individual to use the brain to overcome sensory motor amnesia and the negative effects of stress, trauma, and aging, and empowers the client to hear more clearly the wisdom of our body. I know that sounds a little bit blah, 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 but it basically says what I was just talking about all the way that it does that. So sensory motor amnesia may occur by 3 pathological processes. These are reflexes in our body, and Thomas Hanna described these 3 reflexes in this way, and they do relate to reflexes we have, but some of them are like a combination of the 2. So the trauma reflex is a protective response, and it usually is a protective response away from injury. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, go back to it, but just so you can think of it, if somebody has a trauma response, their body closes down through one side of their body, and they have a little bit of a rotation as well. So you might have seen people that have like a little bit of this going on, or they might have one shoulder sloped, or they might have one hip hiked. That's in Thomas Hanna's work. That's a way to look at trauma. Like, have they had a physical blunt to their body? And you look at that stuff in the beginning of, I think it's module 2 in the Pilates diploma. But this is just another framework to look at posture. So it's not It's not exactly the same as you see Pilates postures, but actually they can kind of mesh over one another, and it just gives you another framework to understand it. So trauma reflex is that kind of closing down. The startle reflex is a stress response. And the really interesting thing about the startle reflex is it happens in all vertebrates. So it's actually an animalistic response to stress. And what happens is the whole front side of the body usually closes down, and it's designed to make us look small. So we end up a little bit like this. And it's also designed to protect the vital organs around here, heart and lungs, and it's quite amazing. So lots of different animals will do this, but humans do it as well. And it's always in a response to a threatening situation, a stress response, like trying to protect. What's cool about the startle reflex is it can happen whether the actual threat was real or imagined. So start to think about how people have, in their nervous system, some people are really resilient. They just can have lots of fun, like different things happen to them, like awkward conversations or being fired or like, you know, these things, and they're just resilient. They don't really seem to be stressed about things. And then you have other people that are really stressed all the time. And it's actually not necessarily that one person has a really hard life and one person has a really easy life. It can also just be the way their nervous system copes with stress. So this is a really interesting thing to understand as a practitioner, because you're not going to have one size fits all for your clients, and you're going to have to really start to pull apart like how does their nervous system respond to these kind of exercises or respond to these situations, and not just be like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. That's not scary. I don't know why you're scared. So it just gives you a little bit more, I think, empathy and understanding around people's nervous systems and how they're going to respond to threat, even if it's imagined. And then the Landau response, number 3, is actually the opposite. The Landau response is the get up and go response, or the take action response. And there's an activation through the back side of our body, kind of an opening and external rotation of the limbs. And that really gets you prepared to move forward. So that's an arousal response. And a little bit of a fun fact, that response is actually the reason why tummy time for babies is so important, is to actually get them to have that response. And when you're looking at developmental movement, they're looking for that response to happen in the first 6 months. So it's when their bodies, they start to lift their body a little bit off the floor, and it's about getting ready to move. So it's the response they have before they start to crawl or do this pattern. So that's kind of cool. Does it run okay so far? Any questions? It's a bit weird because I can't see you, so I'm really sorry if I'm not responding to hands. So just shout out if there's any questions. Cool. So, outcomes of using the somatic approach. It teaches people to become their own somatic educators. We touched on that at the start. This work is about first person as opposed to third person. So you're actually teaching people to have some ownership and also some accountability for the way that they move and the way they experience movement and also pain and discomfort. So it's a really interesting approach. I really enjoy it personally because I think it really helps clients to meet you halfway on that journey and give them some power and I guess like onus, but also like take some of the pressure off you to have to come up with all the answers, because how can you possibly guess what's going on in someone else's body, even with all the information and knowledge you're given? So you're basically facilitating them to have a better experience in their body and facilitating them to understand and be able to explain what's going on for them. It's really interesting. The motor cortex, I'm going to read this one. The motor cortex responds to slow movements through sensory feedback, whereas the cerebellum responds to fast movements. The somatic exercises are commonly taught by verbal guidance so the brain can find the movements in its own body. What that kind of means is you've got your motor cortex, your thinking brain, and then your cerebellum is your old brain. That's like your brain that tells you to breathe and to make your heart beat. It's very unconscious. So it's getting us to move from a place that we're very consciously aware as a way to help release the tension patterns, and that means we've got to move really slowly. So it's just basically saying that exercises have to be slow. And the other reason, the reason we put verbal guidance in is because then you're not like getting up and looking and comparing to what you see. You're trying to keep inside that relationship with your own body. So when we do the exercises a little bit later, I'll try to make sure that I verbalize as opposed to demonstrate. And that'll just be a different experience for those of you who are used to watching. As a somatic educator or therapist, you can assess basic posture reflex patterns, that should say reflex, that are habituated. You can observe how emotions create muscular contraction patterns. That's really cool. That's something that you delve into much more as you go into the somatic movement therapy full course. But just to touch on it really briefly, your body has a physiological response, and it is your brain that decides what that emotion is. So your brain is determining which emotion suits the physical response that you have, which is a really cool thing because the brain is like attaching the emotion to the response, but you're actually having that response in your body first, that physiological response. So you can change the physiology and you can have an emotional change, which is really cool. It's like it works in reverse as well. As a therapist, you can also determine how muscle contraction patterns affect somatic disclosures. So how people are observing and perceiving themselves. You can communicate how to use the daily maintenance exercise series, which we'll go through, and other somatic exercises to maintain comfort, ease of movement, and receive wisdom from their somatic selves. Somatics can free people from the prison of their bodies. If you use muscles voluntarily, you'll become voluntarily aware. Hopefully that all kind of fits into place after what we've been talking about. We're going to talk a little bit about how sensory motor amnesia occurs and what the HANA somatics work does to get you back out of that again. And just before I talk about that, I'm going to flick forward, all the way to this picture because I think it's much clearer here. Do you see my mouse? Yeah.
Yes, Ash.
Cool, awesome, thank you. So when you, if we're talking about these stresses or these day-to-day situations that happen that create stimulus or stressor to the body, what can happen is in this particular setting, this is called your sensory motor feedback loop. So you have your motor neuron down to your body or your muscles to make them move, and then your sensory neurons back up to your brain to tell your brain that your body has moved, has made the action, and that the next piece of information can keep going around. You also have this awesome little reflex arc. I really like this because there are some things that don't go all the way up to the brain, and reflexes are part of that. So a reflex is like when you touch a hot plate and you pull your hand away before you even thought to pull your hand away, or when the doctor I don't think they really do this anymore, like they knock on your knee and it makes your leg go like this. Something that your nervous system organizes without necessarily going up through your brain. It goes through your sensory nerves inside, like through your spine. So it's really cool. And a lot of the startle reflex and the Landau response, they happen through the reflex arc as well. So it's before you've even consciously realized what's going on or made a decision up here, it's already happened. It's so fast. So this is your sensory motor feedback loop. And what happens with sensory motor amnesia, kind of as the name suggests, is the brain is not aware that the muscle has stayed on. So the muscle receives, the brain receives a message, oh my gosh, I need to like run. Well, that's a bit obvious. Okay, let's do computering. So the brain's like, oh my gosh, I'm at the desk, I'm really stressed, and these muscles all activate. And then it sends the message, you've got to, like, you're stressed, create the stress in the body. The muscles do that. And then it sends back, I'm still stressed. And then over time, literally it's like the brain has sent the message so many times that the muscles are maxed out. They can't do any more, but they keep sending the message back that they're still stressed. So the loop's going round, but actually there's no change in information. And so until you have a stimulus change or something shifts, that becomes like a little bit of amnesia. Like the brain can't take in any more information. The muscle can't take in any more information. And so the loop is a little bit sketched out and there's this amnesia. I'm going to explain that to you a little bit in your own body. So I want you to take your hand And I want you to push as hard as you can into your upper trap. Is it sore?
Yeah.
Anyone not sore? Maybe try the other one. Really push. So, and in this case, your traps, if they're sore, are experiencing sensory motor amnesia, because until you did a stimulus change by pushing down on the muscles, I'm sore, it actually didn't, your brain didn't know it was sore. Your brain hadn't. Is everyone all right? I hear some background noise.
I can't really chat. Is 5:30 okay?
Oh, it's Bruce. Bruce, are you all good?
Yeah. Oh, cool. I'd love to see it.
1 second, guys. I'm just going to stop share and just mute Bruce.
Yeah.
Oh, no, I can't.
Oh, how long is it going to take me, you reckon?
Bruce, can you hear me?
Ash, I'll send him a text message if you want to keep on going.
Thank you. Thank you.
Am I talking too loud?
Yeah, sorry, Bruce.
Sorry about that. Apologies. I'll mute myself. Apologies.
No worries. Cool. Okay, let's go back into this. Oh, sorry. Sorry, team. Let's just bring this back up. Here we go. Oh, back. So, where were we? So if you've pushed your trap and you feel that suddenly you're like, that is really sore, that's actually you recorrecting your sensory motor loop, because your brain has got a new stimulus to go, oh, that's sore. And that's when we can begin to start releasing it. But we can't release something that we didn't know was tight to begin with. And that's how we end up with chronic muscular tension. Another way to explain this, and Bruce teaches this a lot, is to just take your hand like this and just tap your hand and keep tapping. And you're going to keep talking and keep tapping, or keep listening and keep tapping. And we're going to keep doing this for a little while. And I want you to notice that the sensation might start to change in your body. So what happens here is our brain is exposed to so many different stimulus throughout the day that as soon as something is going on for like a bit too long, it doesn't prioritize it anymore. It picks something else to prioritize. It picks something else to focus on. And so this is a reason why sensory motor amnesia can occur. It doesn't have to be that the brain didn't get the message anymore. It can be that the brain just like chose to focus somewhere else. So and maybe you can feel now that there's like a bit of a difference in the sensation because you've just kept doing the same thing. But if you went and hit it, straight away the sensation comes back. And so you change the stimulus and you change the sensory neurons experience. So then the brain interprets the experience differently, and that's how you get the loop back. Now that I've shown you that picture, hopefully that's clear to think about how that loop could occur. But if we go back to the slides, this is just basically the breakdown of that. So the shortening of the muscle, contraction, inhibits the output to the muscle. The output is the brain coming down down the motor neuron into the muscle. When the muscle is fully contracted, it can't receive any more information. And because it's only capable of contracting, muscles can't release, they're only capable of contracting. It actually means that the sensory information gets lost on the way back up to the brain, and then the muscle remains tight. It doesn't know to release. This produces a change in the resting level of the muscle. So what we have to do in the somatic education work, the Thomas Hanna work, is further go into the contraction, like contract even more into that so that we reawaken the sensory experience. And then as we release out of that, ideally the goal is that then the muscle will release to its original resting tone, or to a resting tone below where it was before. And this is how Thomas Hanna justified his work, and how this idea that everybody needed to be doing this all the time to release chronic muscular tension patterns in their body. So that just says what I just said it all, but it's here. When the muscles are tightened in response to the trauma, I don't like the word trauma there. I think it should say stressor. Trauma is affiliated with so much negativity these days, and what they really mean in terms of trauma is that there was a stimulus or a stressor. So in response to the stress, even when the stress is not there anymore, the message is still being sent back to the brain, so the tension will remain until the resting position is reset. This is where the interestingness around real or perceived comes into play. Because if you are somebody whose nervous system is very jacked up, or you've experienced something that's left you quite alert and stressed, you might find that your experience of having to have a confronting conversation with your boss is so intense that actually your body responds to this stressor, and then it doesn't actually release out of that even when the trauma is gone. So that not only even when the stressor is gone or the trauma is gone, but if it wasn't actually there to begin with, like it was a perceived stress as opposed to an actual stress. And I think that's really interesting because we talk about the nervous system, and I don't know how much you guys know about the nervous system, but you have your parasympathetic nervous system and your sympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic is rest and digest. And this is really basic, but to give you an idea, and sympathetic is fight or flight. You would have heard of fight or flight. So it's like, get up and go, do something about it. If you're operating in this space, it doesn't really matter if the trauma or the stressor is there or not. You're probably going to keep holding on to chronic tension because the body hasn't been given any kind of message to come out of that. So if you perceive stress really intensely compared to somebody who's maybe a bit more in their parasympathetic, a bit more go with the flow, you're going to end up having more of this chronic tension and less understanding of how to release it unless you do this kind of education and work. So it's just kind of interesting.
Ash, can I ask
how this stuff comes into play? Yeah, of course. I can't see you. I'm so sorry. Let me see if I can get this up.
Whatever.
Who's asking?
Miriam.
Cool. Yes.
Yeah. So based on what you're saying about this overload and that this is a cumulative thing and the sensory stimulus and, you know, where people get up to, it's a complete desensitizing potentially of their whole feedback loop in their body. Yeah?
Yeah.
Great. Awesome.
Yeah. So,
and
oh yeah.
Yeah, sorry. And oh no, go for it, and I'll finish in a second. What were you going to say?
So I guess you can have people on this sliding scale. You can have people who are incredibly sensitive, and you can have people that don't feel anything. And actually, they can potentially have the same issue because it depends on their nervous system and how it's responding. Is it like shutting down and they're just kind of numb, or is it like really highly agitated and then they feel everything under the sun? But it's kind of you're on a sliding scale of the same issue, which is that they're probably got lots of chronic tension and just no understanding of that it's even there, or let alone how to release it.
Perfect. That was pretty much what the second part of my question was going to be anyway. So amazing. Thank you.
Cool. Awesome. So if we go into this last little bit, it just basically says that the exercises help to bring the soma into play. So you're getting people to become aware of their own body, aware of their breath, aware of what feels like it's calling their attention. And when they're listening and resonating with their bodies, they're able to learn implicitly. And that literally means learning from paying attention to the internal sensations as opposed to external cueing, which is really interesting as a Pilates instructor, right? Because we get taught to cue so much. But I think it just gives you another idea to look at, which is, yes, explicit or cueing, verbal cueing, demonstration, that stuff is really important. But also there's so much knowledge inside the body already. And if you have the skill set to teach people how to listen to that, you're going to have a really different experience as a teacher, and potentially not better or worse, but potentially less stressful maybe for you. Okay, so let's just make sure I didn't miss anything. So the last thing there is like only sufficient effort is used to move, nothing more. This sends messages to the motor cortex of the brain to create the change in the resting position of the muscle. The somatics is a little bit different to Pilates, and I am still trying to find that fine line in my own practice where it's like, do what feels good. Like don't push your body to do more, but don't do less, but do exactly what it needs today. And I think that is the same in Pilates, but sometimes if we are trying to ramp people up, if it's really cold and they don't want to do anything, then you have to verbally and like actively push them a little bit more. Whereas somatics is a bit different. It's not about getting a workout or like getting fit. It's about listening to your body and moving with exactly the amount of effort that it needs today. This is all about assessing how the somatics works. So how your brain is arranging your muscles and because it is happening now, it can be changed now. That's all about staying in that first person point of view. So trying not to, and staying present as well. So trying not to think about the past, like past experiences that you're comparing this to, or future experiences that you might have, because that really pulls you out of sensing your body in the present moment. And the idea with the somatics is like, because you're in that space, you're actually able to release some of the tension during that time. Your brain doesn't know how to take your body back to a relaxed place. I feel like the last part of that sentence should say without a new stimulus or without a change to the stimulus. So it does know, it just for some reason has not got that information from the sensory motor feedback loop. So it just needs to have that loop reinforced again so that it has a change and it can then create that change. In order for destructive patterns to release, it is important not to even mimic old patterns once released. Move away from the negative and into the positive. Help the client see things in themselves so they can work with it themselves. So you're giving them that accountability and ownership. When something is pointed out, don't try to fix it. Otherwise you end up with two sets of contractions. This is a tricky one that I'm still trying to navigate as well, because sort of hard to get your head around, but we're taught in somatics, and I'll talk to you about that now, is not to correct. Like unless they're doing something that's dangerous or it's, you know, really maybe potentially going to hurt them, which is pretty unlikely. It's not really about teaching them to correct or adjust because you're not trying to go with something that you see as being the best option. You're trying to get them to connect with how they feel. So sometimes if you'll try to correct something or fix it, you're going to end up with somebody trying to contract while they're already contracting, and it's a bit of a mess. It won't really work. So I won't correct you unless I feel like today I might, if I think you're in the wrong position, because I want you to learn the exercises, but generally I won't correct people even if they're in the wrong position, because it's not the point of the exercise. If you're learning it to teach it, it's a bit different. So the somatics work will automatically change the internal body image without external imposition by the brain. To relax the muscles, you need to slow down the motor cortex and reduce the co-contraction that is occurring and responsible for inhibiting the movement with ease. Doing the movement slowly in the somatic exercises will prepare you to move faster and more efficiently in everything else you do. The mind has to give the body permission. The body will say no sometimes, so the body also has to give permission. That is a funny little thing to say, but I think it just, what Bruce and Tracy are trying to say there is just, if you're not really present and you're not really sure and you don't really want this in your body, or a client doesn't want this, it's probably not going to happen, because you're working with your entire nervous system and its entire history. And so it's going to come to things when it's ready to come to them. And I think that just from a therapist point of view, you're just reminding yourself to have compassion for people and meet them where they are, and letting them not do something if it's not working for them, because potentially their body's not ready for it or their mind is not ready for it. And then all emotions, expectations exist outside of the present moment and help the body to get into problematic habits and contracted conditions. The role of the somatic therapist is to help unlearn the involuntary contractions. And as a somatic educator, you shift the focus so the client has a kinesiological and physiological experience through biofeedback. Kinesiological is in reference to your body in space. So my body in relationship to how far the computer is away from me, from where I am in space. Physiological is about the internal sensations inside of your body. So they're two slightly different things, but they're both important when you're working somatically. It is person-centered, which means it's first person, not third person. And I like that because I think we rely, even like our whole medical system is designed to rely on third person point of view, which of course people study for many years to have that professional point of view. But I think it shouldn't completely discount your first person point of view, because you're actually teaching people not to trust their own experience or their own body. And there's a whole debate I could have with you all about that, because there's also situations where people can't trust their internal sensations because for whatever reason they have had a trauma and they get funny signals or they get pain signals, and the pain's actually, their injury is not there anymore. But in this instance, it's actually trying to promote that people listen to their bodies more instead of blocking things out. And you as the practitioner facilitate the change that the client makes to himself or herself. You are not fixing them, but that's the same in Pilates anyway. You are not responsible for making their chronic muscular tension patterns release. And if they don't release, that's not on you. You are just facilitating an opportunity for them to have a different experience in their body, but they have to do the work. And I think that could be plastered across my head for the rest of my life. You have to do the work, because time and time again in Pilates or somatics, you're going to come across people that expect you to fix them and think that that's the deal. And I think it is in your best interest from the very beginning to make that really clear that it is a collaboration between the two of you, and they have to meet you at the halfway mark if they're going to get anything out of that experience. Cool. So check in. This particular point is very important, because in somatics, you do something called a somatic check-in. I think when I was dancing, it used to be called a body scan. So some of you might have heard of it before, but we're going to do one right now. So I'm going to get you to all lay on your backs, but in a position so that you can still hear me. Make sure you feel nice and comfortable and warm. Close your eyes down. Let your arms drop by your side. And you're just going to start by becoming aware of your breath. So a gentle inhale and exhale through your nose. And just noticing how that air moves through you. Does it move into your front of your chest? Does it move into your belly? Does it move into your ribs or your back? As practitioners in training, your biggest challenge in somatics is going to be, how do I observe without analyzing or fixing? So it's not about making it more Pilates or making it more deep or shallow or any of those things, more yoga. It's literally just observing. What does my body do here? And as you let the air enter and exit out of your body, you may notice areas of your body that move a little more. You may also notice the heaviness or the weight of your bones. If you feel at any point that you're experiencing discomfort, feel free to shift position. Yeah, listen to what your body's telling you. There's a message there. But also become aware of the weight of your skull, the weight of your shoulder blades, the parts of your spine that are connected to the floor, the weight of your sacrum, and the heaviness of your pelvis, the weight of your legs, potentially especially your heels and your calves. And just really letting yourself spread and yield into the floor. And I also want you to become aware of any areas in your body that are calling more attention than others, that are pulling your focus. And you're going to see if you can really look into that area. So imagine that, maybe just pick one for now, and imagine that you had a giant magnifying glass. But not only a magnifying glass, also something that could do X-ray vision and really go past your skin and deep into that area. And you're going to see if you can just scan through that space. And just notice if there's any black spots or gray spots or dull spots. Can you see it clearly? And as you breathe, you're going to see if you can breathe some light into that area. Light it up. Make it visible. Make it clear. And it's okay if you can't, because it might not be available yet. Just notice if it's possible. Then you're going to let the magnifying glass fade away. You're going to wiggle your fingers, wiggle your toes. Maybe take a little stretch if you feel like that's useful for your body. Noticing how your body wants to stretch here, how it wants to move coming out of that. Carefully rolling yourself onto one side. Maybe blinking your eyes open just to bring yourself back into the space. Notice if you don't want to come back into the space. That's okay too. And then when you're ready, come back over to the computer or the screen. So that's a somatic check-in. It doesn't always have to be the same. I didn't have that planned. I just went with what I felt was useful at the time. Sometimes they land, sometimes they don't. But my intention is for me to be present and for me to invite my clients or my friends, whoever I'm working with, to be present in their own bodies alongside me. And so I just wanted to ask what you guys found when you just did that. Maybe because it's a bit annoying that we're not in person, I might just say your names so that you can, well, I don't know everyone's name actually. I might just go through and just let you know when I'm pointing at you. So Brad, we'll start with you.
Hey, yeah, that was nice. I feel good. Yeah, I do sometimes. We did a body scan with Bruce once, and I do sometimes feel like when I am trying to find that area, it is somewhat blocked, but I feel I'm capable of getting through if I really focus. Yeah, I could have gone for longer.
Yeah, totally. I did cut it a little short, so
Yeah.
That's good that you felt that. So can I give you a little bit of feedback?
Yeah.
So I'm going to catch you on your word good and ask you to find a sensation, which is really tough. Most of us don't really ever have to describe our bodies sensationally.
Yeah. I guess aware. Yeah, because and in meditation as well, like I have an extremely active brain. I find it very, very, very hard to switch off. And so, yeah, and I am internally very switched on at the same time. So there's a lot going on. So I guess aware would be my sensation.
What does aware feel like?
What does aware feel like? Concentrated, present.
Concentrated is good. Concentrated gets you. Do you see? I'm just picking you apart and
Good,
with everyone.
Good.
But sensation is really hard to describe. We're not used to it. Most of us don't really have to do it ever. Concentrated gives me a little bit more because I think of maybe pressure. There's some kind of like closing in or pressure. So then I can start to think of what a pressure sensation would be like. So if that's accurate, great. If you feel like it's something different to that, keep going. But what you want to think about is with a sensation, it wants to be something that you physically could feel as opposed to emotionally feel. And that's harder. We're used to saying how we feel emotionally. It's really common. It's harder to say how you're feeling physically, like as a sensation.
Yeah.
Do you want me to leave you to have a little think rather than put you on the spot like that?
It's all good. I think it was like, so when you were talking and you said you were you said especially your tailbone and around here, and it was the sensation for me was around my lower back, and trying to kind of like feel with what you were saying with the magnifying glass and get through kind of all of that. But a sensation, it was concentrated, I guess. It was kind of focused to try and allow that magnifying glass to scan through.
Was the area that you felt like your tailbone, was it like tighter, or was it expanded? I don't know. I'm just curious because I've got a spot. So I really, like, as a practitioner, I know where we're working with. So that clarity is fantastic.
Yeah, it was heavy.
Heavy. Amazing. That's excellent.
Okay.
So you can see, and I'm just using Brad as an example, poor thing, I put you on the spot, but
it's okay.
to go, how do we actually get to sensation? Like, how do we pick that apart to get to that point? Because we are clever human beings and we know how to talk the talk. We can talk ourselves into lots of different stuff, but when you distill it down to like, what was the sensation? Heavy. Great. So now you have something to compare later on when we do other stuff. And is that different? Like that concentrated heaviness, does that change later on? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being so generous with that.
Yeah.
Cool. I think Tracy, you're next.
Initially, it took me a while to actually kind of like get into myself. But I definitely felt very heavy in my hips, my pelvis and my legs. And I felt off center. I felt kind of twisted. So, and then I felt cold, and then the sun came through the window and it warmed me up. So that felt good. But yeah, I definitely felt distracted initially, but then I felt heavy.
Cool.
Heavy in my head as well. Like the base of my head felt heavy, and my coccyx felt heavy through that lower part.
Cool. And with that heaviness, was there any was it like a gluggy heavy, or was it like a bony heavy, or? It
was like a full heavy, like a heavy sack of wet potato heavy. Like, so as in I felt like a volume of liquid in my legs and in my hips.
Great. Do you see how just by like being a little bit more provocative that I'm getting totally like way more clarity on what people are experiencing? And yes, I don't know exactly what a heavy sack of potatoes feels like in Tracy's legs, but I have a great image of what that might mean for her and what we'd need to do to try to make that feel a little bit more like lubricated water-wise, or, you know, let's take the heaviness out of it and create lightness, you know. So just using that to your advantage, but it means just being really crystal clear on what sensation is, like what that actually means, and practicing in yourself, like what are sensations? Because that's not a sensation, that is a sensation. Like you start to test yourself, and then you can actually have the confidence to ask somebody to come on that journey with you, like I'm doing a bit of this.
And when you talk about light, I couldn't get light into my pelvis, because when you talked about light, it went into my stomach. So I couldn't actually get any light into my pelvis. It was dark room. It was dark in there. That's how I would describe it.
I've just lost you, Tracy. Has anyone else lost Tracy?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I didn't feel any light. I couldn't bring any light into my hips at all. I just felt really dark there, but I could get light in my stomach, but I couldn't get it past there.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting tool that you can use in Pilates if you want to work somatically, is light, because often when people have something that's not quite resolved in their body, it's a little bit, when they picture it, it's dark. Like there's not a lot of clarity around even being able to see it. And that can be a really interesting pathway to then take people on. So if I was going to work with you, Tracy, I'd probably work on pelvis and do some imagery work around that, but also get you moving at the same time, just to see if we could create some way of shining that light in and just seeing what we find. Does that sound okay?
Yeah. Exactly.
Cool. Now, I'm so sorry. I don't know everyone's name. I should be able to, if I come out of my share screen, I should be able to see everyone again, I think, which will be better. Let me just make sure. Let's stop share. Oops. There we go. Jean. Sorry, Jean. I was like, I can't see names. How did you feel?
I really liked it. I had a bit of a sore lower back, so I kind of adjusted myself. But when you were like asking us to kind of like go in depth, like with an X-ray and like looking into your body, so I was doing that with my lower back. And what I noticed was the color was very gray. So for me, that's like saying like, you know, I'm aware there's a bit of pain, but it like, I know like it's getting clarity, like soon it'll be back to normal. It's just like a little bit sore at the moment. So yeah, I really like body scans.
And did you have any sensations? Like, it's great that you had the gray, like there's a color there or something. Some people are really responsive to color.
Yeah. I don't know, like I do body scans quite a lot, and I find I am quite aware and awake of like my body and how like I can move down and feel my sensations and where it's a bit tight, where it's a bit sore. So yeah, I think, yeah, like kind of, yeah, just aware.
Cool. Okay. And then Miriam, did you do a body scan? How did you feel?
Well, a couple of things. Presence is a big thing for me anyway. Like when I teach, it's a life thing, you know, so I focus a lot on presence. So for me, it's like dropping into like the deepest, most satisfying part of myself to ask me to do a body scan. And it's like, I try and live like, I don't know, as many of my awake hours as possible in that place. So when you ask me how it feels, to me, it feels like the most delicious feeling in my body to do a body scan. It ignites me into feeling like I'm really purposeful, but when shining, like, you know, going seeking around for anything, it's not, a body scan for me doesn't necessarily come down to physiological discomforts in any kind of way, like which is possibly in contrast to everyone else. And so when you were asking to do that, I was like, it's not really, settlement in my body doesn't highlight physical discomforts like that. It actually does something that is opposite to it. It settles any physical discomforts, and almost like whatever might be there as a low level thing, it actually allows that to turn right back down to like 1 or 2. And it's like, as soon as I bring focus to it, it diminishes nearly instantly. And so therefore, as like, if I was looking for something, I was like, okay, cool, I can feel something across my left side of my sacrum. What does that feel like? It feels like there's a pebble there, you know, it's like, it's not completely blocked, but it's just like, it's a pebble and it's on the inside of my sacrum, you know, that would be that very specific location and spot to it. And so that was one of those things. But like saying when I body scan and I settle with it, it's like my nervous system goes, and with that I get quite a beautiful release physiologically. And so therefore, it doesn't generate any feeling of discomfort, oh, that's wrong with me, or judgments or whatever else. It actually is quite the opposite. It actually removes any of that drive or critique that can sometimes come in for people with a body scan. You know, it really, like, your language was very embracing. And yeah, I find that with presence, the more that you actually learn that a body scan is about presence, not about assessment. You know, it's not a critique of this is what's wrong with me. You really get quite a different physiological response. So sorry if that's really different to what you guys all got.
No, don't apologize at all. And can I just ask you as well, Miriam, on a like ballpark figure, how many body scans you reckon you've done in your life?
I would say, how many do I do a day?
Yeah. Okay.
Like, I reckon, like, honestly, I would have sat here even before you were asking, like, and you told us to do anything. I reckon consistently in my day, I reckon I'm like every 30 minutes, I'd be body scanning.
Yeah.
Like for everything. Like if I go to move my hair out of my face and I move my hair out of my face and I'm not registered that I touched my own face, I'll move my hair out of my face again to tune in with the fact that I'm touching my own face.
Amazing.
That's how much of a nerd I am.
So I wanted to highlight that because I can tell from Miriam's language, and I also know Miriam and I know her history, that she has been doing somatics for a very, very long time, even if she hasn't necessarily done the Thomas Hanna somatic exercises. And I'm sure that's the same with many of you, that you're realizing today is that you're actually doing somatics quite often. You just maybe didn't have a name for it. And so I really reflect on that. You saying that you don't necessarily find things that are wrong or sore because you're constantly in touch with your body. You're not losing that touch that then things are numb and then they come back. You're probably not having as much of that sensory motor amnesia as others. And that's just because of your presence. So very commendable, and something I'm still working on in my own body for sure. But yeah, very cool.
My jokes to all of that are like, cut caffeine out and you'll find it really easy. Like it's a hard thing. Like as soon as you drink coffee, it's like your mind goes blah 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 like at you, and it's like, and so therefore it's like, I don't care that people drink coffee, but it's like if you're trying to find that settlement, it's really hard when you've had coffee in the morning. You'll get like, you just go, there's no way. Like my brain's like, get up, do stuff, come on, get into it. So
yeah,
it would just be, and yeah, like what you offered right at the beginning of the session, Ash, like it is just a consistency thing, you know. It's just like you just do a little bit and then you'll be like, okay, cool, I can do another one, and now I'm with it. And beautifully, like it doesn't become the criticism. It's actually a really beautiful place to keep solidifying yourself and your experience of the world, you know, as opposed to it actually being something that's about like, oh, my right glute's tight. Oh, there's that sore left knee again. Oh, my pelvis isn't this. It doesn't become like a measure of what is wrong with you, which, you know, is powerful.
Yeah, and it can have the potential to do that if you're not present. If you're thinking about the future, or how am I going to fix these things about myself. So you're right, it comes back to the present. So thank you for sharing that. Vanessa, do you want to share a little bit about how you felt?
Yes, I'll just unmute. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I do body scan and stuff like that, again, like you said, probably without knowing this is where it comes from. I think I come from a dance background, so I'm quite used to checking in with my body more through the framework of moving. And so often, yeah, that coming to stillness thing, I maybe a bit like what Miriam says, I feel very much the just release of everything. Usually I feel quite, yeah, able to just have a fairly even sensation through my body, I think, and release. And so, yeah, it's really interesting when I'm like, yeah, lying there just going, okay, what is actually calling to me right now? And I was just kind of scanning around, and then I thought, oh yeah, my pelvis just feels heavy, like bone heavy, weighted on the floor. And that's the thing that has caught my attention most. But just as I was thinking that, suddenly I just had this other sensation that just suddenly took over. And I was like, oh, that's weird. And it was just like the area just sort of in front of my armpits a little bit, just suddenly felt like really expanded and just drew my attention away from that heaviness. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so I just kind of focused on that and just followed your imagery with the bringing light in, and it's sort of that then kind of dissipated. But it was just, yeah, interesting.
Cool, awesome. So that's the thing about the scans as well, is that, and it ties into Miriam saying it's not necessarily an analytical tool. It's like things can take you by surprise when you're just laying and being present in your body, and who knows what that was. But if we were in a one-on-one somatic context, we might do something with that, and especially with your background, we might actually start to move you a little bit more freely. So the somatic movement therapy work that I've done uses the Thomas Hanna work and a few other toolkits as kind of prescribed exercise, because they're set, but a lot of the work that I do now is free. It's like free movement practice as opposed to exercise practice. So that's where this stuff actually ends up going if people are interested in that. And then lastly, Beck, I don't think we can hear you very well, Beck.
Is that better?
Much better. Yeah, excellent.
Got the computer and there's like everybody's in X-ray and the mic's gone, so I have to look up on the telly to see anyone. It's really annoying. Okay. That made me really tired. I don't know whether it was because I feel like I'm wearing so many hats at the moment, and then just having the opportunity to lie down and my mind just had the opportunity to zone in on me and forget everything. And it was like for the first time, my mind didn't wander. I could just lay there and just be still and be with it. So that was really nice. Thank you. I felt my chest really heavy on the ground. I've got quite a flat thoracic, and I don't know whether that was just part of it, just being really kind of, I don't know, I just felt weighted down on the ground, and yeah, but still at the same time felt space within my rib cage. So yeah, it was unusual.
Cool. Thank you for your share. Beck, as well, I'm going to ask you, do you mind if I use your explanation as a bit of an example for the group?
Yep.
So for Beck to say that she felt tired immediately does not surprise me at all. I mean, I don't know you, Beck, but in terms of the general pop, does not surprise me at all, because if you are operating in a sympathetic nervous system drive, like go, fight or flight, many hats, that kind of experience, and you lay down on the floor and give your body a moment to rest, it is actually starting to bring you into your parasympathetic nervous system. And when you reach that place, that's where your body is deciding to go to sleep, to digest and sleep. And if you haven't actually come out of sympathetic, because you can sleep in your sympathetic nervous system, you know, when you're not sleeping well, you can sleep like that. But when you truly move into parasympathetic, if you haven't been resting properly for a long time, you can feel like you've been hit by a truck. And I reflect on my journey into meditation, which again is a work in progress, and that every time I lay down to meditate, I'd fall asleep within like 5 minutes, because I actually just did not have the capacity to meditate, because my body was so tired and my brain was so tired operating in fight or flight all the time, running a new business, that as soon as I gave my body a chance to stop, it fell asleep. Like instantly, which was bizarre. And I really realized, I was like, oh, I actually need to be way more rested in my real life if I want to meditate, because at the moment my body and my brain are prioritizing sleep over meditation. It's like, that ain't important until you've had some rest, girl. So that's what I hear from you, and something that is potentially, you know, we all have our own journeys, and things are only possible when they're possible. But it's going to be a lovely session for you this afternoon to feel fully rested. And if you fall asleep, that is okay. That is actually very much part of your experience of this stuff, if that's what your body needs today.
Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all of those, guys. That was really generous, and also just helps everyone kind of start to understand a little bit how this stuff comes together in the physical sense, because it can feel very wordy and talked about on the slides. And I think because we're not in person as well, it's hard to communicate the physicality and the experience of this, which is actually what it's all about. So from here, I'd like to, oops, where can't I go? There we go. I'd like to talk a little bit about the somatic postural types, but I'm also aware, okay, so we break at 4, and I'm thinking what would be really nice now is if we did the stuff, like we actually lay down together and we did the exercises, and then we'll come back and we'll go through the somatic postural types, because that part is still really important. But I think it's nice for you guys to go into the movements, move a bit, and then have a little break after this. So what we're going to do, I will exit out of this for a moment. Stop share. And what we're going to do is go through the exercises in your book, but I don't want you to have your book out. Just put that to the side. You're going to lay on your back, find somewhere comfortable, like where you were before. And we'll go through the exercises till 4. And then we might have a little break at 4 just for you guys to get a cup of tea or things like that. I won't take a full 15-minute break because no one's got anywhere to go to move their cars, but just a little break might be nice for your brains. Cool. So when we do these exercises, I'm going to do my best to talk them through for you. There will be a few where it might be useful just to see my body a little bit, in which case I might ask you just to sit up and have a look. But I'll try to keep you in your own physical experience as much as possible, and we can talk through them afterwards. The other thing about these exercises is they are not designed to be like overly exerting for anyone. So if at any point you find that you're not meeting your body where it is, like you're trying to push it too hard or things aren't feeling quite right, stop, rest, find a new pathway. Maybe that's a rested pathway, maybe that's a different movement, but this is the most important thing about the next 40 or 50 minutes is your experience with movement inside of your body, not whether or not you follow the instructions given. From a practitioner point of view, if you wanted to repeat these, there's plenty of opportunities to study them in your own time as well, and we can go through stuff with me if you find that useful. So you're going to lay on your back, and let's bend our knees up so our feet are flat on the floor. Close your eyes down if that feels comfortable for you. Again, become aware of your breath. Let your body settle and spread and sink into the floor a little, but also start to imagine the floor coming up to meet you. This is called your yield, and a yield is the first developmental movement or developmental experience we have in our bodies. It is the moment that we yield into our primary caregiver, so our mother's breast or whatever that is in your experience. But it's not just about letting go or relaxing, it is actually the meeting of two. And it is a very nurturing experience. And so when you lay here on the floor, you are experiencing a yield into the floor, and that the floor is yielding into you as well. And from here, you're going to inhale and arch your tailbone onto the floor and let the waistband of your leggings or trousers lift off the floor into an arch. And then as you exhale, just relax back down and reset to wherever you began. Again, inhale, arching forward, tailbone into the floor, feeling what that does to the waistband of your leggings and your lower back. As you exhale, letting that go, yielding, returning back to a resting space. I'm just going to do that a couple more times. Inhale to arch, exhale to yield. And the next time you inhale, arch your tailbone onto the floor. Feel the waistband of your leggings lift off. As you exhale, press your lower back into the floor. Feel your lower back spread and open, and let your tailbone lick off just a tiny little bit. And then release your tailbone and reset your pelvis to where it began. Inhale, arch your tailbone onto the floor. Exhale, press your lower back into the floor. Let your tailbone lick off. And then allow your body to reset. And you're just going to do this a few more times. This is your arch and flatten. And you may already be thinking, this is so much like Pilates. And if you are, I kindly invite you to stay present in your physical body, because you're not wrong, but we want to try to come into this space feeling like we're inviting our bodies to experience something new, something different. Good. When you've finished your next one, you're then going to take your arms round and interlace your fingers behind the back of your skull. Inhale, arch your tailbone onto the floor. Let the waistband of your leggings lift off. Exhale, press your lower back into the floor. Curl your head and shoulders up, reaching your elbows towards the front of the room, towards your knees. And then slowly, slowly, slowly allow your body to return to yield into the floor. You're going to keep moving in this way. Inhale, arch your tailbone onto the floor. Exhale, press your lower back into the floor. Let your lower back be what lifts your head and shoulders up, reaching your elbows towards your knees. And then slowly, slowly, slowly let your body reset and yield into the floor. And you're going to keep moving with this movement, but in your own time, so with your own breath. Allowing your body to move at this slow pace gives your brain and your body time to catch up to one another. And the slow return is the opportunity for your body to reset to a new resting tone, your muscles to come to a new resting tone. So if they have been even that little bit pre-activated or tight or on, that journey back down into the floor is the real pivotal opportunity for you to let your body relax and reset as you just stay present in the process of the movement and try to let go of the outcome or the shape that you might be perceiving. So what does it feel like to stay present within every single moment of that movement process? One more here. As you let yourself reset and yield back into the floor, you're going to make your way slowly over onto your tummy, onto your belly. But I want you to do so with the same intention with which you've just been moving. So don't break the process or don't break the focus. Have that attention to your own body as you slowly make your way over onto your belly. Staying present as you move into a different position. Here you're going to have your right hand underneath your head with your head turned to the right so that your left cheek rests on your right hand. Or yeah, that's right. And then you're going to have your left hand or your left arm down by your side with your left palm facing the ceiling. Inhale and lift just your right elbow off the floor. Exhale, allow your elbow to return to the floor. You're just going to do this 3 times. Noticing that there does have to be muscular activation, but just being aware, like, what has to move here to allow my elbow to lift? And as I release back down, can I let that go and yield back into the floor? After 3, you're going to lift your elbow, but also lift your head and your hand as if you were looking over your right shoulder. Inhale to lift, exhale to lower. Remembering to meet your body where it is, no more, no less. But also just becoming aware of the movement through your body. As you lift your upper body, how does it feel in your lower body? How does it feel in your lower back? With every return journey, can you allow yourself to reset and release and yield even further, even deeper into the floor? After 3, you're going to allow your left leg to lift off the floor. Try to keep it straight. Single leg raise into the air and then lowering back down again. 3 times. As you lift your left leg, maybe become aware of your right shoulder, your right side of your upper back, just noticing how it has to engage to help stabilize you there. So there's a little bit of unconscious, for want of a better word, engagement. Things that maybe you weren't previously aware of, but now you can really feel the sensation of. And with every lower, allow all of that to release and reset. And then after 3, you're going to combine those 2 together. So elbow, head, hand, and opposite leg, lift up. Inhale to lift. Exhale to lower. And reset and spread, soften into the floor and yield. Remember to slow down the return journey. And do your best to stay inside the process of the movement, moment by moment. When you've done 3, feel free to change hands, again with that care, with that intention, as you make the decision to turn to the other side. Inhale, lift your elbow off the floor. Exhale, allow your elbow to soften back into the floor. And repeat this 3 times. And then when you're ready, inhale to lift your elbow, but also your face and your hand, as if you were looking over your left shoulder. Exhale, slowly lower yourself back down. Allow your body to soften into the floor and spread. Sometimes we can find ourselves being quite aware of getting to the end of the exercise, especially as we know, if we already know how it went. So I just want you to check that in yourself and just see if you can stay really present in the moment. And not feel like you're working towards an end goal. And it's exactly the same when you're presenting this work, when you're leading or facilitating this work. It's how do you as the practitioner stay present in your body and not get caught up with leading ahead, getting ahead of yourself. When you're ready, you're going to lift your right leg off the floor. Inhale to lift. Exhale to lower. Noticing how the left side of your upper back and shoulder respond to that. There's no right or wrong. And then when you're ready, combining the upper body with the lower body, head, hand, elbow, and opposite leg, lift up on the inhale. And then lower down and really truly yield into the floor and let the floor meet you on the exhale. When you're ready, again, you're going to find your way onto your back. Take your time if you haven't finished. Maintaining that presence, that intention, and that attention to how you move. On your back, you're going to have your right knee pulled into your chest. Hold on to it with your right hand. And then have your left hand behind the back of your skull. If this is too much on your lower back, you're welcome to bend your other leg up so your foot is flat, or you can let it stay long. Inhale, arch your tailbone onto the floor. Let the waistband of your leggings lift off. Exhale, press your lower back into the floor. Curl your head and shoulders up. Reach your elbow to your opposite knee and your knee also to your elbow. And then slowly, slowly, slowly allow your body to reset and spread and yield. Again, arch your tailbone onto the floor. Exhale, press your lower back into the floor. Curl your head and shoulders up. Bring your armpit to your knee and your knee to your armpit. And then slowly, slowly, slowly allow yourself to reset. As I do this, I become aware of just how important that return is. So keep moving through this with your own breath. But I'm choosing to say slowly 3 times to really reiterate just how much time you're invited to take as you lower down, and how that can be an opportunity for you to really sense what's happening in your body. You might experience a little bit of shakiness. That is a telltale sign of sensory motor amnesia. It's like your muscles trying to have a little discussion on who's in charge. And so sometimes you'll get a little tremor or a little shake. It's really nice to slow down through that and give your body time to figure out that discussion. Do one more on this side. And then allow yourself to lay flat on your back with both legs extended long. Keep your knees bent up if that feels better on your lower back. And when you're ready, you're going to make your way to the other side. Bend your left knee up. Take hold with your left hand. Reach your right hand behind your head. Inhale to arch your tailbone onto the floor. Exhale to press your lower back into the floor. Curl your head and shoulders up. Bring your elbow to your knee to your elbow. Paying attention to the process as opposed to the final outcome. Noticing if you're trying to create some kind of marker based on things you've done in the past. Seeing if you can move at that same consistent pace as you arch and curl and then slowly release. Meeting your body where it is, no more, no less. You're just going to do one more in your own time here. And then allow yourself to release back towards the floor, however feels comfortable for you. And if you're waiting for a moment, just give yourself that opportunity to do a little check-in. Doesn't have to be a full scan, it can just be, what am I feeling? When you're ready, you're going to roll over onto one side. And I suggest maybe rolling to the side where you can see the camera, just in case you need to have a little check-in if you're not sure, but I'll try to describe first. You're going to lay on your side with your knees bent up. You're going to extend your underneath arm long, underneath your head, so that you're laying on top of it. And then you're going to take your top arm over the top of your head and wrap it over your skull to reach for your underneath ear, still laying on your side. Inhale and you lift your head off your shoulder. Exhale and you lower your head back down again. Inhale, lift your head, use your top arm and shoulder to lift your head. Try to relax your neck muscles. Exhale, slowly, slowly, slowly allow your head to lower back down onto your underneath arm. Just going to go for a few more of these in your own time. Try to feel the weight of your skull. It's heavy, 4.5 kilos approximately. Notice if your neck tries to take over. It's common because it's used to holding your skull on top of your spine and has done for your whole life. So you're asking your body to organize itself in a different way. And that takes a lot of focus. As you lower down, stay down with your upper body. This time, roll your top thigh bone inwardly, but keep your knees connected. So your knees will stay touching, your top thigh bone rolls in, and your foot will lift towards the ceiling. And then allow your leg to rest back down onto your other foot. Rolling the thigh bone inwardly. Keeping the knees glued together. And then you're going to combine the two moves together. Inhale to lift. Exhale to slowly return and spread and yield. Inhale to lift. Maybe noticing the contraction through the side of your waist as you move your leg and your upper body, moving into that contraction. And then exhale to slowly lower yourself back down and yield into the floor. 2 more of these in your own time. Inhale to lift, exhale to lower. When you feel truly yielded through that side, roll onto your back. Take a moment to notice any contrast between your two sides. If there's any at all. And then when you're ready, roll yourself over to your other side. Laying on your underneath arm as it outstretches above you, and then taking your top arm over the top of your head to take the underneath ear. Adjusting if you need to, if your neck and shoulders don't permit. Inhale to lift your head off your underneath arm. Become aware of the weight of your skull. Exhale, lower yourself back down, slowly resetting and settling. After you've done this a few times, feel free to try your leg. Rolling your thigh bone in, knees stay glued together so that your top foot lifts into the ceiling. And then slowly lowers back down again. And then when you've explored that, bring the two together. Inhale to lift. Experience that contraction through the side of your waist as you lift up. Exhale, slowly lower yourself back down. Reaching that moment of true yield at the end. Is there more that I can let go of? Am I still holding tension that I wasn't previously aware of? And if I re-invite that question, do I experience a change? My brief experience as a somatic movement therapist, because I am new to it, a big observation I have made is that most of us really struggle to truly yield. And although it is just one of the developmental patterns, and there are others that are equally as important, it appears that we become very good at the pushing and the reaching and the pulling, and not so good at the yielding. And I don't know the answer to that, but it's something I invite you to ponder. I'm going to do one more here. And then when you're finished yielding through that side, you're going to roll onto your back and bend your knees up. And have your feet about hip width distance apart, maybe a little wider if that suits you. Let your arms reach out gently to the sides of you. Inhale and let both knees drop over to the same side. Really let them flop. Exhale and bring your legs back up to the ceiling. And then play with taking the legs over to the other side. And then build them back up into the center, knees to the ceiling. So I invite you to play with your quality here. Do you like to flop? Do you like to control? What works for your body? How do you come back to the center? Do you feel the weight shift into your pelvis or into your shoulders or into your feet? What do you have to do to make this movement efficient for yourself so that there's no strain? Maybe you'd like to imagine that there's sand pouring into your outsides of your feet or into your knees to pour the weight over, and then pouring back into your pelvis and into the soles of your feet to bring your knees back up. It's just one offering. There's a pouring action, or the idea of sand in an hourglass work for your brain. As you let your knees drop to the right, let your head turn to the left. Notice if this is something that feels natural in your body or if it feels directed. And then slowly recover yourself to center and see what it feels like to go the other way. Knees moving one way, head moving the other. Now you might notice that your entire spine is in a spiral. So your skull is spiraling one way, your pelvis is spiraling the other. The next time you pour over, bring your knees back up to the center slowly and just stay there. And then with your arms outstretched, you're going to turn your right palm towards the ceiling and your left palm towards the floor. But rather than it just be palms, think of spiraling your right arm up towards the ceiling and spiraling your left arm down towards the floor. And if you really exaggerate that, notice what it does to your shoulders. Maybe it lifts one and plants the other. And then try the other way, spiraling your left palm to the ceiling and your right palm down towards the floor. And you can keep alternating here, exploring this spiral through your shoulder girdle. And then you're going to blend the two. So as your knees drop to the right, your head turns to the left and your left palm spirals up, which means your right palm spirals down. So you're looking to your upturned palm. And then you recover back to your center, unwinding out of that spiral to spiral in the opposite direction. Feel these two perpendicular spirals through your body. Trying to stay present throughout the process of the movement, moment to moment. And so I invite you to ponder a new question. Where do I place the value? And it's just something to observe in yourself. Do you intuitively put the value on the most stretchy part of the exercise or the most rested part of the exercise? Where do you find yourself wanting to spend the time? There's nothing wrong with that. It's just, where do I place the value? Let's go one more each way. And when you return up to your center, you're going to extend your legs, but I invite you to make sure that your legs can slide pretty easily so that the mat's not getting in the way for this exercise. So if you are on a mat, it might be worthwhile letting your legs hang off the edge. You'll find they slide a little better. Here, you're going to pay attention to your right leg first. You're going to imagine that you are cupping water with the sole of your right foot. So that involves having to sickle the foot a little. To imagine scooping water with the sole of your foot. And then you're going to bring your right foot in and trace it up your left leg. From here, you're going to try to lift your right foot towards the ceiling, but let your right knee drop out to the side. And then you're going to trace your leg back, your foot back down your leg and let it release back out again. So you're sickling your foot to try to scoop water with the sole of your foot, tracing the foot up your left leg, maybe if it feels available for your hips, taking it into the sky a little bit and letting your knee drop out. And then sliding the leg back down and out. Let's try one more on this side. If it feels better in your body, you're welcome to rest your foot on top of your left thigh and let the knee drop out. Depends on your hips and your SIJs. And then release it back down. Then trying the same with the left foot. So scooping water with the sole of your foot, like you are sickling the foot to pick up the water. Tracing your foot up your leg. And then if it is available, lifting your foot into the sky, letting your knee drop out to the side. And then sliding your foot down your leg, letting it release and soften back onto the floor. Two more with your left leg. As you release yourself back down, we're going to try and go the other way. So you turn your right leg internally, turn it in fully, slide it out along the floor, bend your knee up and let your right knee drop in towards your center as much as you can. And maybe you'll feel your right hip lift a little, that's okay. And then release, let your knee open, slide the foot down and circle it back around. So we'll try that one again. Roll your right thigh bone internally, sweep your leg out along the floor, then bend your knee, let your knee drop in towards your midline. Maybe your right hip will lift a little. And then slide that leg back down and around to let it release. Try one more on that side. Being mindful that this exercise is a little bit unusual for your SIJs. If you know you have a little history, please meet your body where it is. Do not force anything. It's an opportunity for you to get curious on how your hips move internally and externally. And there is a capacity for your pelvis to be moving as part of that. So it's not isolated. When you've done 3 on your right, repeat on the left, rolling your left thigh bone internally, circling it or sweeping it out along the floor. Bend your knee, let your left knee drop inward towards your midline. And then sliding your leg back down, straightening it out and letting it soften into the floor. And then you're going to try and do both feet together but in opposite ways. So your right foot will turn out as your left leg turns in, meaning both knees end up pointing to the right. And then you'll slide your legs back down. And then left leg turns out, right leg rolls in. And as you bend your knees up, your knees will point to the left. And then slide your legs back down again. A little bit like a skiing action. And if that's all feeling okay, you're welcome to try the last one. But if it's starting to show up a little bit niggly, just give your body permission to rest, yeah? Listening into what you need. Otherwise, you're doing both feet scoop the water to turn out your legs and bring your feet up. Knees pointing outwardly. And then both feet slide away from one another. Thigh bones roll internally towards one another. Knees bend and drop in internally into full internal rotation of your hips. And then releasing that back out. Moving between external and internal with both legs. And just finish off your round. So one more each way to let your body settle and spread and yield back into the floor. When you're ready, you're going to roll over onto one side and come up into a seated position so that your legs you have one leg forward and the other leg tucked behind like a Z sit. You're welcome to face me if this helps for this one. The leg that's bent in front, you're going to have that hand rested to the side. And the leg that's bent behind, you take the same arm and place it on your opposite shoulder. Inhale, lift your sits bone. So lift your underneath your pelvis, your sits bone off the floor. Roll your body around the corner to look over your shoulder with your hand on it. Exhale, send your sit bone back towards the floor and allow your body to unfurl back round. Inhale, lift your sit bone, spiral around the corner, looking right over your shoulder. Exhale, draw your sit bone back towards the floor and allow your body to unwind. Just play around with this action in your own body. Then you're going to spiral all the way around and stay there, but then rotate your head and shoulders back the other way. And then rotate your head and shoulders round again into your spiral. And then rotate your head and shoulders back the other way. So getting a little bit of an upper body movement separate to the lower body. Then you're going to imagine you're a little bit like a pepper grinder. So your upper body goes one way and your lower body goes the other way. So you start in your spiral with your lower body spiraling round and then your upper body coming back towards the camera. And then you're going to move both upper and lower body away from one another. And then spiral the other way. You just start to notice how you map this in the present moment. Become aware of any glitches or shakiness. And just seeing if you can take your time to find this in your body. And then lift your pelvis again and spiral all the way around like you did initially. And just turn your head back. And then let your eyes travel all the way over to the right and then all the way over to the left. But rather than letting them flick, see if you can map the horizon with your eye line. Seeing every part of your space. And you're just going to see now if you can let your head turn one way and your eyes map the other way. So if I'm turning my head right, my eyes are looking left. And if I'm turning my head left, my eyes are looking right. And just see how this feels for your body. It's very challenging to move your head and your eyes in different directions, but it is excellent for your vestibular system. And then there's another way to map movement in your body. And then just unwind out of that, and you're going to switch over to the other side. Place one hand on the floor and the other hand across your body onto your opposite shoulder. Inhale, lift your sit bone and spiral your body around the corner. Let your head and shoulders and eyes be part of that. Exhale, draw your sit bone back to the floor. Let it unravel your body back towards your front. And keep moving like this. And on this side, you can even start to use your eyes from the very beginning. So mapping the horizon. Noticing if there's any areas that your eyes want to flick past, that they struggle to trace. And then staying in your spiral, let your lower body stay there and just turn your head and shoulders back. And then back round again. So you're just moving the top half of your body a few times. And then if you feel up for it, try to spiral your upper body and lower body in opposing directions. And if you've got it in you, you can keep mapping the horizon with your eyes as you do this. And keep yourself in your full spiral back around the corner and just turn your head back over your shoulder towards your front. And you're just going to move your head back and forth a few times. And notice if your eyes can stay mapping that pathway. And then trying to move your head one way and your eyes the other. And then releasing out of that. Coming down onto your back, laying yourself down flat, hugging your right knee into your chest with your right hand, taking your left hand behind your head. Inhale to arch your tailbone onto the floor. Feel your lower back lift off. Exhale, press your lower back into the floor. Curl your head and shoulders up. Bring your elbow to your knee and your knee to your elbow. And you're just going to do 3 of these. Inhale to arch. Exhale to lower. To curl, sorry, and then slowly, slowly lower. Where do I place the value? After 3, gently changing over to the other side. Paying attention to every move you make in your body. Pulling the knee in. How do you take your hand behind your head? Inhale to arch your tailbone. Lift your waistband of your leggings or trousers off the floor. Exhale, press your lower back into the floor. Let that be what helps you curl your head and shoulders up. Bring your elbow to your knee and your knee to your elbow. Two more here in your own time. And as you lower for your last time, let your legs drop into a space that feels comfortable for you. Feel free to be still or to move a little, whatever feels good. And just take 1 more minute to do a little body scan. Just to notice if there's any changes, if there's been any shifts. And I invite you to find 1 word, just 1 word, to describe the sensation you feel in your body now. Just give it 1 thing if you can. And then when you're ready, roll yourself over. Take a little stretch. Wiggle your fingers and toes if that helps you kind of rebring yourself into your present. So when you've been that deep, you just need to create a little shift in yourself that brings you back into your room, whether it's eyes or fingertips. And then bring yourself up to seated when you feel ready. And we're going to take a 5-minute break. Is 5 minutes enough? Just give me thumbs up or thumbs down. Would you like 5 or 10? 5 is good. Figure then we can finish 5 minutes early if you want on a Friday. But just before we take a break, I'd love if anyone feels comfortable for you guys to say your word, just one word. If anyone doesn't feel comfortable, just give me a little wave or leave if you like. But otherwise, I'll say your name so that you know to go. Beck.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Lighter.
Great.
So lighter and more energized.
Brad.
Fluid.
Great. Vanessa.
Light but energized as well, almost like a just a buzzing kind of light energy. Yeah.
Jean.
Weightless.
Miriam.
I'd say simple.
Tracy.
I know it's one word, light but flowy.
Great. Doesn't have to be a question. It's your experience, so it's right. Well done. Great job, guys. That's quite amazing that you all felt quite similar and quite different to heavy. Most of you described heavy earlier. So it's just interesting. There's no right or wrong ever. I'm not going to pretend to know all the answers. There's certain things that come up, but I just think it's excellent for you guys to feel that in your body, to feel the contrast of what something like that can do. So we're just going to break for 5 minutes. It's now 4:15. So let's come back again at 4:20. Feel free to mute yourselves or turn your videos off or whatever. Grab yourself something to eat or a drink is fine. Go to the toilet and I'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you. Cool. Some people are back. We might just wait a couple more minutes. Are you feeling, Brad?
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Have you done a lot of meditation? So I don't even know your background. I should have asked everyone at the start, but we kind of got straight into it. What is your background?
Dance movement. So yeah, it's I think meditation for me has always been a struggle. But I try. I feel like I can find meditation in other ways, like gardening.
Yeah, cool.
And fire twirling. But yeah, it was nice.
I identify with that. I've found myself enveloped in somatics and somatic movement therapy because I came from a dance background too, and I found that I didn't know how to meditate and be still. Like I was like, I can't stay in my body when it's cold or when it's, I don't know, I was like, it has to be moving and fluid. And I just find the somatics is like a moving meditation, not so much the exercises you did then, which are great, but even when you take it a bit further and go into the free stuff.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, that was my that was going to be what I was going to say. Yeah.
So the work goes from being that kind of prescribed exercises, and it builds into like things, for example, such as sensing the cerebral spinal fluid in your body, like in your spine, and moving with the cerebral spinal fluid. And what does that feel like when it's this weightless amniotic fluid? It's the same fluid that you are in the womb. And so we can do like a 45-minute investigation of cerebral spinal fluid. And I reflect on when I danced, because I danced like in courses, like VCA, those kind of courses. And we used to do that kind of stuff, but I guess my intention was very different back then. It was very performative. And now I feel like it's truly somatic. So that's been an interesting journey, and something that I invite anyone who is interested in this work. This stuff is like the teeniest, tiniest little tip of the iceberg. And it just goes like, whew, and it's pretty amazing. Confronting sometimes, but pretty amazing too.
I find meditation in general very confronting. I try and eliminate the word out of my repertoire of words when anyone says that, because it's like, if you're being asked to meditate or if you're being asked to stay present, a lot of people really struggle with that. So
For sure. Does anyone have anything they'd like to share about that session? If not, we can keep moving, but just want to invite you guys to speak a little if you feel something comes to mind.
I noticed and really enjoyed that the real slow return. I felt like really facilitates that feeling of yield. It reminded me of that thing you did when you were little, where you lay on your tummy and you got someone to hold your arms up for a while in a little bit of extension and just held you there for ages. And then when they lower you slowly down, you feel like you're moving all the way through the floor. That's kind of a little bit what it felt like to me, which is nice.
That's such a great, I had not thought of that in a long time, and it's such a great experience to help someone feel that, because it's so true. You do feel like you're going so far down. So that's kind of a cool little hands-on somatic hack that you could play around with. Anyone else?
You know, at the start when we were laying on our tummies and we had our head was facing one way, we're rotating back.
Mm-hmm.
When we went to the left side, there was a complete massive change in my feeling between my left and right side. It was to the point that it almost affected my pelvic floor. It actually shocked me a little bit. I went, oh, hang on, what was that? Like, it was really weird. That's all I can say.
That's okay. That's the beginning of your investigation, to kind of go, all right, I'm going to play around with that again at a different time and see if I have the same experience, or, you know, you can start to have a little feel for what that could be for you.
Yeah.
I think
Anybody else?
Yeah, like what we were just kind of saying, would love to be, I guess, invited to try a similar approach, but with, I guess, like less direction and a more emphasis on the freedom of transition in between kind of like each I guess kind of movement, if that makes sense. The crashing I actually kind of like enjoyed a lot. Like that for me was when I kind of then checked back in with my head. I was like, okay, cool, I'm here because like my weight was like quite heavy, do you know? And the eyes was really cool. Turning your head one way and then turning your eyes the other way. That was really cool. But yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that messes you up a bit when you're trying to figure that one out. But it all, I've found I've done this quite a lot and I'm still not great at it, but it gets better. Like as I do it, repeat the movement more, I can feel that I can start to map it a little more. And it's just interesting to notice. It's your vestibular ocular reflex that you're working with there. So we're programmed to do head and eyes together, and there's some really interesting stuff that can happen for your vestibular system when you actually go against that reflex, because you're not conscious that you're doing that. It's just part of your body at the moment. Like you don't realize, oh, I turn my eyes when I turn my head. It just sort of happens, the same as like when you pull your hand away from a hot plate. So actually working to change that up can be quite powerful. And I think as well, when you talk about changing the way in which you move, like turning into the drop or the heaviness, that's actually something that we're going to talk about a little bit later, called means whereby. So it's asking you to become aware of the process in which or how which you get to that movement. Because what's really interesting about this work is you're so in it, and then sometimes you just go, say I'm like here doing something really, I'll pull this down, doing something really considered, and then I just go, it's like suddenly we're completely disconnected from our body when we flipped over. We didn't stay in that process of means whereby, which is like, how am I going to get from one space to the other, and can I stay present in that process, as opposed to just thinking, now I've got to get to this spot. So that's something I was repeating. I did a lot of repetition. I'm not sure if you got that, but it's a lot of repetition in the way I spoke, because it's reminding your body of the means whereby. How am I getting from A to B? And am I putting my attention in the process of that, or am I thinking A, B, and just getting there? And that's what you would have noticed later on, maybe with your eyes, where they flick as opposed to stay in the process. So that's actually a technique of somatics that you experienced, that noticing the means whereby when you went more with a dropped quality versus with a sustained quality. All good. Anyone else?
If it's okay, like I'd love to share a little bit as well, and just go, it's so cool that when you remove outcome from movement, that is what completely brings in that harmony and that sense of lightness that everyone, you know, kind of spoke about at the end of the session. And it really is a massive re-imprint of this word meditation, or what, you know, it is. It's like, it totally takes away this idea that meditation is like the emptying of yourself. It actually brings a complete refocus to, it's like, you know, it's almost like the filling up of yourself, even though that sounds like you're pumping your own but hopefully you guys get the idea of what I'm saying. And it's like the process of filling yourself up on yourself in all of that means that you were just talking about, like how you go from side to side, but also just the simplicity of how beautiful that makes you feel in your body when you do that. And that as such a powerful communication tool, whether you're teaching Pilates-based movement or somatic-based movement, to actually invite people to experience movement like that. Because not only does it take away your need to be a perfect teacher, but their need to impress upon you that they can do it as well. You know, it allows for such a deep association to how their body feels moving. It's just very beautiful to have in your own body, but to be given these tools to give it to another.
Mm.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
I like to, can I add on to that actually, Miriam? I think that as well, like just from a class that I do teach at the space, which is a free movement class, where I basically will often start with a lot of eye gazing and things like this. And you can really sense, I think, visually the people who have allowed themselves to find that space, because it resonates quite truthfully from their bodies, which is cool.
Awesome. Thank you. That was excellent, both of you. It's exactly where this work like sparks my interest. So it's nice to hear other people discovering that too, is letting it be. Like, I think I'll share a little bit, is that I came from a dance background, like actually like many of you today, where outcome is, and especially a ballet background at the beginning, where outcome is so pivotal, like it's shapes and poses and steps, that my question to myself constantly, and one I shared with you today, is where are you placing the value? And what's so nice about somatic movement therapy is this work is designed for you to explore in your body as a reflection of how you are in the world. So if you're placing your value always on the push, which is a somatic movement, developmental movement pattern, and not giving any value to the yield, then what does that how does that show up in your life as well? And that's where I find this work incredibly powerful. And if you wanted to venture further into having those discussions with people, I would highly recommend doing the extra training, just because it gives you the confidence to have those discussions. But it's like, not only is this incredible for movement, but this stuff can teach people about how they're showing up in the world, in their relationships, in their environment, and just help them resolve and just find newness in the way that they can be if they start physically in their body, physiologically in their body, and then let that expand out into their world. So it's really powerful, this this way of seeing yourself in this particular context, and then how that can be taken further. So thank you. Anyone else before we continue?
I really liked it. I found it was like, to me, it was like doing like a yoga session. And yeah, I liked the eyes gazing, because I find when I do these types of exercises, I often like close my eyes and just want to like be in the moment. So to open it and kind of have almost distractions, but like, yeah, I really liked it.
Cool. It's the somatic work. If we date it back, if we go right back, the beginnings of the roots of somatics is in yoga. So the reason it feels so similar is because somatics as a concept started with yoga, really, and then went on to be a little bit embedded in German, like in modern dance. So first like in Europe, and then later on in the US. But it was about, with the modern dance side, it was like, why are we like, let's rebel against performing in this kind of like Russian classical style, and let's start to pay attention to the way we feel and move with that. And so that's where that started to come in. And then Feldenkrais is a little bit like the father of somatics, but there's also like Alexander technique, which is really big with singers, and Franklin method, which Bruce has done a lot of, is even like kind of somatics. It's a bit more based on like biomechanics, but it is still somatic in the way that it uses imagery. And so there's so much. Rolfing, structural integration is another one. And it's just kind of like, this is an opportunity for you guys to see that there is this as a possibility, as a future study point, but even just something you can utilize now in your Pilates. So it's just a really interesting tool that I think is one of the, in my experience, which I mean, I'm sure Miriam can even speak further. She has much more experience than me in Pilates, but in my experience, it's been a game changer for how I teach movement, Pilates and otherwise. So cool. Okay, so let's go back to the slides and look at the somatic movement postures or postural types. So these are in relation to the startle reflex, the trauma reflex, and the Landau response. So they're at the beginning of your booklet. But then now we go into the postural types, and this stuff's pretty important, I think, because you end up needing to reference it in your final assignments. So make sure you kind of get yourself clear on this stuff, though it's pretty simple once you get the hang of it. So the red light postural type is in relation to the startle reflex. So it is the shutting down of the front of the body. Trunk has more flexor activity, and the primary muscles of contraction along the somatic center, so particularly rectus abdominis. You also see that the adductors are more active, so they pull the legs in, and even the arms can flex in a little bit with general internal rotation. So if I do kind of a demonstration of that, a very exaggerated demonstration, it looks a little bit, I can't even show you my full body, sorry. Looks a little bit like this, or sideways a little bit like this contracted forward shape. And so I just invite you, I don't know if you guys are teaching yet, but even if you just consider someone in your life that maybe has a little bit of that red light posture in them, it might not be significant, but it might be a little subtle indication that maybe they've gone into that space, that startle reflex, many times over their lives, or they live in that a little bit. And then you've got the green light posture, and that's more related to the Landau response, that get up and go, get moving response. So that's paraspinals and erectus spinae are contracted, and bring the pelvis into an anterior tilt and the head more upright. You can probably see in my body, this is much more my posture. So you can see that I'm already a little bit in that green light posture. Then the shoulder blades are often closer together with the chest lifted a little bit. External rotation of the limbs. Arms often hang away from the midline, legs abduct, or extend and abduct, and often they end up having a little bit of hyperextension in the backs of their legs as well. And then sciatica is an accompaniment due to this tightness through the back of the leg and this pulling down through the back of the body. So I really love getting into the somatic postural types when you start to go, what are the kind of signs and symptoms of these postures? Like with green light posture, like if somebody shows up and they're like, I've got heaps of like sciatic pain in the back of my leg, or I'm getting that referral down my leg, you'll be like, just looking at it in a different way, like, hey, that reminds me of the green light posture. So what were the exercises I could do that would help rectify that like tightness through the erectus spinae and let people reset into their muscle tone? So it's just another way to look at it. And you'll notice as you go along that your Pilates exercises marry a little bit with some of these. It's just whether or not the intention is the same. And so then we go into the trauma posture. The trauma posture is the body moving away from the pain or injury site. So it's often, if I had a horrible experience where a guy jumped off a balcony and landed on my head, and I ended up being in this kind of like closed down, I think I was a bit closed down this way. So it was like my body had moved away from the trauma side. And so that can happen. It's usually always in relation to an actual injury or an actual situation. So it's not perceived the way that the startle one can be, but you can have like car accident, you can have a rolled ankle. They can really exist on quite different spectrums, but for you to have like a bit of a blunt trauma or something where you've had like a physical injury, like a fall, or somebody's run into you in a sporting match, those kind of things, that's when you'll often have the trauma response. It mostly only happens to one side of the body because it's coping with the response to trauma. So you get this side bending action, but you also, because the waist shortens, you also end up getting like a little bit of a rotation as well. And Thomas Hanna is awesome. When you read the book, he's pretty, like, I think the first line in the book is, or the first paragraph is called The Myth of Aging. So he kind of tries to debunk the idea that there's any such thing as aging, which I just found to be incredibly bold, but also super interesting. And he talks about scoliosis in response to the trauma posture. So you think of everybody who tells you that they have a slight scoliosis, or I've been told I have a slight scoliosis. You're like, maybe actually you just had a trauma at some point, like a fall or an injury when you're a kid, and your body's just kind of not grown that way, but it's just developed into this slight scoliosis. And it's just a question for you guys. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just inviting you to get curious on that as an idea.
It's quite a big like title for a posture, isn't it? Like quite a big name. Like you'd never kind of, I guess, address a client if you were teaching somatics and say, oh, you've got trauma posture.
Yeah, no.
I kind of also feel like just with the not symptoms, I guess, of this posture, a lot of women who have babies are they want one, because they're carrying the baby and one side is shorter, so it doesn't necessarily mean that their posture would be traumatized. They've just carried a lot of weight on that side.
So it reminds me back to when I said, can we replace the word trauma with stressor?
Right, yeah.
Early on. Yeah. But in saying that, I will say that in this particular posture, he does talk about the fact that it's almost always an impact. Like there has been some sort of like injury or impact. And I think that's why they call it trauma. But you're right. I think trauma has such a massive connotation of different things that it can be these days, and we use it a lot, and it can really trigger people. So I think it's worth finding a new name for it if you're addressing it with your clients, definitely. Yeah, I think even more, I wouldn't maybe even talk to them about that stuff these days, and that might just be where I am in my development of a teacher, but I would just sort of see it and log it and then make decisions on how I was going to teach exercises, because I think sometimes it's really good to make people aware, and other times it can unravel them depending on the kind of person it is. So yeah, it just depends, I guess, on who you're working with and where their nervous system is on that fight or flight, rest or digest scale. So Thomas Hanna has taken his information and based his literature on science. So this talks about the primal reflexes. You don't really need to know or remember these at all. They're just included in your handout so that you can reference them if you ever need to. But it's basically looking at how the primal reflexes in our spine relate to the startle reflex, the Landau response, and we don't really have a primal reflex related to trauma because it's not something that's, I don't want to say supposed to happen, but it's something that happens to you. It's an external experience as opposed to something that you develop or you have in your primal reflex development. And then in somatics, it is the internal process of becoming more aware of your body and becoming equipped to make changes. So we've talked about that a lot, making those changes within. It's likely in living in a mindless everyday life, so the opposite of how Miriam lives, to get stuck in any of these reflex postures. So I'll repeat something I said earlier, where it's not a problem that we have the reflexes, and it's not a problem that we have a response to the reflex. The issue is when we get stuck in the reflex. So this reflex is essential. It's vital for us for survival. This reflex is vital for us for survival. Otherwise, we wouldn't do anything. Otherwise, we wouldn't learn how to be protected. But it's a problem when we get stuck and we're not able to kind of resolve those in our own body. The aim is to create sensory information that sends the information to the brain so the motor neurons can voluntarily create a change. We go back to this You've got to create that sensory information change so that the motor neurons, or so the brain knows to send a new message to the motor neurons and create a change voluntarily in the muscles. The aim is for the client to learn to make the changes themselves, voluntarily contracting muscles to reduce output to muscles so that the motor cortex can reset the resting place of the muscles. And by considering the neurophysiology relationship to exercise, the client is taught how and why they are doing the exercises by using the motor cortex. So they're not, again, they're just concepts for you to consider. It's not like you've got to remember all of it to teach somatics. You've just got to understand how it all fits together in a broader scale. If you have any questions, though, let me know. So some of the other concepts that we talk about are somatic self. And this is a little bit what I was saying earlier about emotions are physiological responses that become feelings when the brain interprets them. So they're actually just physiological responses, and it is our brain that then decides that's making me sad, that's making me happy. And so we can physically change the way that we move to create a physiological response that will have a corresponding emotion. And I laugh because I think the most mainstream version of this is the power pose. I don't know if you've seen the TED Talk, but the idea of the power pose, that like if you're going into a meeting where you have to like prove yourself or do a speech or things, you want to assume the power pose so that you feel powerful, and then you have a physiological response that is powerful, and then you do better in that. So that's somatics. It's just more mainstream somatics. Alexithymia or themia is when you don't interpret feelings and sometimes get physical symptoms as a mechanism by which the body deals with the emotion. This can be gastrointestinal problems, headaches. So this delves a little bit more into the psychological aspect of somatics, and definitely something that I personally didn't touch on in my Pilates until I had done the somatic course. That's a preference, that's a personal thing because of my experience of how much I knew about the psychological part, but now I understand how that plays a role a little bit more, is that people can often end up with symptoms in their body that are, can be like emotions that weren't interpreted or stuckness that they need to release. Cholerae discharge is a concept about the anticipation of the nervous system getting ready to do something. So there is a study, and Bruce used to reference it a lot, and I'm sorry I don't know it very well, but I do know there was like the basketballers, and they split them into groups, and some of them actually shot hoops and the other ones visualized shooting hoops, and actually they ended up both being able to shoot the same, like a very similar amount of hoops on average in the end, because as they just visualized and got themselves ready, their nervous system was doing this cholerae discharge. It was like preparing them to do that, so they actually could still do it even though they hadn't physically done the exercise yet. And then efference copy, parallel memos going out, letting your body know that it is going to move. So it's like a little, your body will give you information if it feels it's listening. So you're almost, again, similar, like visualizing that you're going to do something and then doing it, and your body will be ready to do that because of this idea of efference copy. So it's just different concepts. Somatic disclosure is referencing your body's ability to disclose itself. So it will actually reveal more to you if it feels you are listening. And that's when you can suddenly start to unpack a little bit more. Or you might be like, I was, like Vanessa, I think it was Vanessa, you said you were here and then you were here. So people can have new things coming up for them. And somatic perception, the act of sensing your own soma, your own body. It helps you to reset your muscles to the normal resting state. Regular practice avoids emergency muscle contractions and achieves muscles being as close to their authentic state or most true state as possible. So you're not ending up with any unresolved chronic muscular tension patterns. The techniques, oh, is everyone with me? All good? Cool. The techniques means whereby, we talked about that a little bit. There's a beautiful practical in your booklets that I would highly recommend trying. I mean, I didn't want to say, can everyone bring somebody? Can everyone bring a buddy to work on? But ideally, if I was in the studio now, this is the one part that I would really love people to pair up. And it involves you holding somebody's skull So you'll see it in your book and you'll be able to reference it. Grab a housemate, grab a partner, someone, and try this. You hold their skull, you kind of cut under their skull, and you want to anchor your elbows in so you don't, because you're going to hold it for a little while and it gets heavy. So you're going to hold their skull and really gently you're going to turn it from one side to the other. That's it. Yeah. And what you get to experience there is means whereby. So how does the body turn? How does the head turn from one side to the other? And the person also gets to experience having that happen without necessarily actively using anything. So they're having this means whereby experience of like how my body moves from one place to another effortlessly. And what you guys get to experience is tissue resistance, which is a term we use in somatics that refers to the moment where there's just a little bit of kickback from the muscle. It's like, oh, it doesn't quite want to go into that space, or it sort of resists a little bit, and you can feel it as being fascial or ligamentous or tendinous, but it's like this tissue, oh, that's enough. Like, and you can feel it when you touch somebody else and you move them as well. It's not just something you feel inside your body. It's something that you can physically feel through someone else as well when you do this. So be mindful of people and watch that they don't have like neck injuries, although that could be interesting if you feel very confident, because that's going to show you some really hefty tissue resistance. But ideally, it's probably best first time around to have someone with a pretty healthy neck, just while you experience what it's like to hold their head first and then gently move it. So that's something that I'd encourage you all to do as a little bit of homework. Kinetic mirroring. The process of bringing the origin and insertion of the muscle closer together so that the muscle can relax after the contraction. And this is a spinal cord event involving Golgi tendon action so that the muscle spindles relax. Personally, I never really understood this until I started working with my partner, Rob, and he does a lot of neuro work. And sometimes he does these funny things where he'll like flick the tendon or chop the tendon. And I was like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm activating the Golgi tendon so that the muscle spindles can pull together and relax. And I never understood it when I was doing somatics initially, but then when he did that, I was like, that's what that is. That's the kinetic mirroring. So we're doing it in a more conscious, active way. There's also a way that you can do it, like a third person can do it to you through the Golgi tendon. But either way, it's the same idea. It's bringing their origin insertion closer together so that they contract, so that they can then relax again. And it's part of the sensory motor feedback loop. And then this is my favorite part, pandiculation. So one last time, I'm going to get you to lay down on the floor. Wherever you feel comfortable this time, so back, front, side, I don't mind. Close your eyes and imagine you've been in bed for 8, maybe 9 hours at the moment, because some of us are getting more sleep, which is nice. So you've been relatively still, you've been asleep. And so you literally wake up, no alarm, so that there's no shock, and you just start to gently move your body. How would you move here? Like when you really visualize what it's like when you first wake up, what do you do in your body? Do you stretch it? Do you twist it? Do you kind of tense it up? What are those moves that you go into when you first wake up in the morning? Cool. And then what about if you are in that movement where you kind of do like a morning stretch, like it's almost like tense, but it's opening. Yeah, that's a bit more. And there might be even some yawning or some funny sounds that come out of you. Sometimes there's like a little shake or a little shiver. The thing that feels really good, like it looks really weird and it probably even feels a bit weird and contorted, but it also kind of feels really good at the end. This is called pandiculation. This is not accidental or made up. It is something that all vertebrates do. And it is a co-voluntary version, or like it's a co-contraction. So the muscle kind of stretches and tenses at the same time. And you get this like, ugh, and then you come out of it. So you probably have experienced those before, whether or not you did just then. But you get this like, oh, I'm kind of tense, but I'm also lengthening, and I feel like I'm going to just get into this really wacky position, and then, oh, I come out of it and I feel really good again. And cats and dogs do it all the time. And we wonder why they don't have low back pain. And tigers and lions do it every time they wake up. So if you have a pet, watch and learn, because they're all doing it, and it's a systematic stretch, a lengthening and contracting of the muscle at the same time as a little self-care routine. It actually preps them to get up and move without tension. And I have, I started doing this thing because I had so much pain in my back of my hip and in my lower back. But I was like, I'm just going to set my alarm 2 minutes early, and I'm going to try and set it to as least abrasive as possible. And then I'm going to not get out of bed straight away, and I'm going to take 2 minutes to panticulate before I get out of bed. And I tell you what, my pain changed so much. And I know that's just one anecdotal story, but I invite you to play around with it, and play around with it with your clients, because it's something that is actually in us. It's there for us to use as a way to support our body to move freely, and yet we've just kind of forgotten about it. We've brushed it aside because we think, well, that's weird, or I'm not going to waste my time doing that weird stretching thing. But you'll notice when you're really tired or you had a really good sleep and no one else is around, you do it without even really realizing, and then you wake up and you wouldn't have even thought about it. So play around with this, because this is really cool, and this can actually help reset you in a way that we've just created. I've just taught you all these exercises, how you can do that consciously, but there's also stuff in your body that just actually does this on its own if you just listen into it. So I think overall, I can harp on all day, but the most important thing you can get from this session is just like listening in to what's going on in your body, and like teaching others to listen in. Because imagine if we all listened to what was going on sensationally and we operated from that place. If we felt, hey, my heart's beating really fast and I feel really sick in my diaphragm when I talk to this person. Whoa, what's that telling me about how I feel about this situation? And how do I come from a place that is different to defense or anger? And so I think you can learn a lot from the physiological sensations in your body. And I'm an idealist, but I feel like it would just make us all exist in a better world if we were moving and working somatically all the time. Probably a little slower, but from here, so I just talked about it, but the science behind it is it's considered a stretch, but it is the action of contracting while lengthening opposing muscles, like animals do in their self-care routine, prepping themselves for moving. The process is a polysynaptic reflex involving an electrical impulse being transferred from a sensory neuron to a motor neuron via at least one connecting neuron in the spinal cord. That might even be through your reflex thing. I don't know that for sure. Stimulation of pain receptors in the skin initiates a withdrawal reflex. That's the hot plate reflex, which involves several synapses with several motor neurons and results in the removal of an organism or part of the stimulus. So that particular is the withdrawal reflex. And then, the hot plate, which is the withdrawal reflex. And then panticulation is a voluntary version of this through the process of contraction and relaxation. This is your, I jumped the gun. This is your practical that's really nice to do. It's written in your textbook. It's something that I would have done today if we could, but it's probably just, it doesn't really work holding your own head. It's really nice when you're doing this. Also, if you start to feel like jerkiness or shakiness, that's an indication of sensory motor amnesia. And I want to be clear here, these terms are terms that Thomas Hanna coined to create what's that called, Miriam? Not a practice, but like a
methodology.
Methodology, thank you. A regime. So the same as Pilates. Pilates, he's got like 6 principles and he works with those principles. But not every exercise class needs those principles. They all do different things based on their own methodology. And so when we talk about sensory motor amnesia, if you start rattling that off, a lot of people are not going to know what you're talking about because it's a term that's very specific to Thomas Hanna's work. But and same with like red light posture, green light posture, that sort of thing, trauma posture. But I think it's worth having them in your toolbox, and you just got to be smart about the way you communicate to others with them, especially if you're working with like a physio or an osteo, because they're not going to have been taught this stuff, but they're going to have some kind of understanding of what you're talking about. They'll just have different terms for it. Cool. I created this little infographic a few years back when I was trying to understand sensory motor amnesia, and Bruce asked me to include it here just because he thought it was useful. So you get a trauma or a stress to the system, and it can be real or perceived. From there, there's a disruption to the feedback loop in the sensory motor system. Then there's an involuntary unconscious muscle contraction, which leads to a loss of muscle control, loss of motor control, which leads to a loss of sensory awareness. That's what you talked about earlier, Miriam, with this like numbness or just this overload. That can lead to chronic muscular tension that we can't feel. That can lead to postural compensation. So we start to see those red light, green light trauma postures. That can lead to an inability to function effectively, which may include pain, soreness, or for Thomas Hanna, he calls it aging. And then that often leads us to resort to a third person diagnostic opinion. And often we end up being labeled with structural damage. And the reason I found this so interesting is because maybe it's from how much the way that I've taught with a lot of people who have had lots of diagnosis, but I just felt like everyone had a disc bulge, everyone had scoliosis, everyone had stenosis. Like there was just so many diagnoses, and these people just lived in their diagnosis and just never moved again based on that. And I just found that phenomenal because I came into teaching people who had been doing Pilates loads longer, like years longer than I'd been learning it. And I was like, what's going on here? None of them want to move. And that made me really interested about this idea of relying on third person diagnostic opinion. Don't get me wrong, it is important to have it. Sometimes you need to know, people need to know what's going on with their bodies. And it is important to have some sort of framework for some people, especially just to feel safe. And it's important for us to have some framework so that we feel safe as teachers. But I think it's something to consider around, like, they often have a label because somebody gave them a label some time ago at some point, and you might be never ever moving them into a space again because of that label. And I invite you to maybe get them to spend some time in their body somatically, and then encourage what feels good for them and notice if they do, because they might say, I have not been able to rotate for 10 years. It's not something I do. And I say, but do you drive? Oh, yes. I'm like, so you're rotating. You've got to look over your shoulder. So it's just those questions to invite and get curious around, is like asking people maybe to be somatic in their body and then experience movement newly so that they're not afraid.
Ash, may I just ask a question?
Absolutely.
Going back to something that was in some of the earlier slides, so a little bit of a step away from what you were saying, but still related to it. You mentioned about gastrointestinal responses earlier. Is there any correlation between red light and green light posture and gastrointestinal?
Like in the theory and evidence, I don't know for sure.
Yep.
Anecdotally.
I was going to say anecdotally. Yeah, go for it.
Totally 100%. Particularly startle, because there's a lack of breathing, and there is some evidence around breath to do with startle. But if your diaphragm's like stuck, then nothing's moving down here. So your digestion isn't getting, when you breathe, you know, you get that movement up and down through your internal organs, and so you're not getting any motility, I guess. You're not getting the mobility internally, so then you're not getting that motility as well. So yeah, it's huge. It's actually huge anecdotally, but I just feel like I couldn't say for sure. Like it doesn't have anywhere written exactly that, or that there's any research that's been done that's that we got taught, but I'm sure there is stuff because you see it a lot.
Yeah, it's just, I ask because it's like anecdotally, like postnatally, so many women don't go back to learning how to breathe properly either. And there's so much of that asymmetrical pelvic floor weakening, you know, lack of strength. And then with that, the digestive issues that so many women get postnatally as well, which they just assume is exhaustion, right? Which, fair enough, that may very well be there. But, you know, it's just interesting to see how you can support different demographics, I suppose, with all of this, irrespective of what the trauma is, which I think, Brad, you said earlier about postnatally like that as well. So just, yeah, I was just curious whether you had any experience, you know, anecdotally, you know, I'm sure there's some science somewhere that we could dig around and find that supported it.
and personally, so if I speak from my own experience somatically, which I'm trusting more and more these days, it's like, yeah, for sure, there's some difference when I change the way I breathe and I understand that I need to like yield loads more in my life, then my digestion improves out of sight and I'm suddenly less allergic to things than I used to be, which doesn't make sense. It's like, how can you be gluten-free for almost 20 years and then suddenly not have it bother you anymore? It's just lots of interesting stuff. So I think it's just, it's a bit of a can of worms, but it's fascinating to go through and investigate a little bit with your clients. And I think giving them the best that you have with that knowledge is really great. Like if you can help them in some way anecdotally, I actually think that's pretty great.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ash. That was perfect.
Sorry, Ash, can I just ask a question too? With this somatic teaching, if there's been a trauma, say to a child going through sort of that sort of pubescence age of so that 15, and can that actually affect their speaking? So, I mean, I know it's not like a movement that we physically do with Pilates and that, etc. But speaking and being able to articulate words has to come from somewhere. So, is there a possibility of reversing that effect? So, if
I think so, in somatic movement therapy. I don't know if I would take on someone like that yet because I'm still finishing off my training. I've finished it, but I've got my hours to do. But somebody like Tracy from Tensegrity, she's been doing this work for 25 years. And so she'd probably take someone on like that for sure. So she talks about that there's like 2 really pivotal times in your development. And it's like the first 2 years and then that prepubescent time are like 2 really pivotal times. And if there is anything that doesn't, you know, if there's a trauma, there's things like that happen then that can severely affect developmental, like how you developmentally develop, but also like if there's little glitches in the system as well. So immediately when I hear that, I think, yes, definitely that could be part of it. You know, it could be breath related. I don't know what the speaking, if it's like a lack, I don't know what it is.
I'm talking about my son, my 20-year-old, but you know, because there was a massive change and he's very athletic, and I believe that there has to be something within this that could actually channel the wires to be able to free. There's a blockage, and I just think there has to be a way to be able to free it. And I think this possible format of training could be a way to go when we've exhausted every other aspect.
Yeah, it's a beautiful format because it works with the body foremostly, and it uses like the body to unlock things along the way. It's also not like, it's pretty, there's no like one track to do this work. It becomes very webby in the sense that like there's this tool, then we're going to take this tool, then this person's responding this way, so we're going to take this tool. So there's not like, often there's not a time frame, and that's why it can be hard to sell this work, because you're like, I don't know how long it's going to take and I don't know what's going to happen, like, but I know that it works with persistence. So
it does help release. So like, and the brain has to be able to move. It has to be able to just like kind of like give off the signals to move in a certain way. So surely that can unwind things somehow.
Yeah. And I come back to the idea that how you are in your body, so too you are in the world.
Yeah.
And so the somatic principles, I've got to try and remember them off the top of my head, but a huge part of it is like if you want to create a change to somebody's experience of the world, you need to change how they move. And you don't just tell them to move differently. There's a whole process of inviting imagery, inviting different stimulus, inviting different ways to encourage. And so I'll just sidetrack really briefly here to kind of explain where the somatic movement therapy goes to help you understand that. When you work with, so a lot of the somatic movement therapy does not work with, you know, able-bodied Pilates instructors. I've been working with very high needs, wheelchair-bound teenagers and adults, because it's just a totally different kind of practice. You're not trying to get perfect movement, you're actually just trying to get something. So that's been really interesting. But when you work, for example, with an autistic child, and I haven't worked in autism, but we learn this in the course, an autistic child is very sagittal. Or an autistic person will often be in their sagittal plane. They kind of get stuck in this forward backness. So they'll be rocking, or they'll be kind of in this sort of space. And what you look at from a somatic perspective is you don't go, I'm going to suddenly tell that child to do something different. But because they're here, what we learn in somatics is that horizontal plane is the conversational plane. It's where we naturally are when we converse with others. And it's what we just we develop into knowing to do that, but some kids don't develop that. So he is stuck in his sagittal plane. So I need to find ways and methods and techniques and fun opportunities for him to explore his horizontal plane. Because if he can explore his horizontal plane, he is going to be much less likely to be freaked out by people approaching and into that plane, because he's just not ever been able to go there. He's always been here. Someone approaches from here in my horizontal plane, it's like, what are you doing? I've not even got a reference point to engage with you. So that's what comes to mind for me, is this work goes deep, delving into how do we actually look at planes of movement? How do we look at the vertical plane has been, this is evidence-based, has been linked to eating disorders. Like when you work with somebody and they can't get off the floor, often that's a sign that they might have had an eating disorder. You can't diagnose that. That's not in my scope, and I don't know for sure, but it gives me a moment to go, okay, that person doesn't know how to take their space in the world. They can't get up off the floor. And so the vertical plane becomes associated with taking space, taking up space. And so there's all these interesting little bits to pull and join together, but I just want to give you those examples because I don't know exactly what the voice would be, but I'd say it's got something to do with quality or plane or breath or something to do with how he feels in the world, even if he's not conscious of it.
Absolutely.
Is that okay?
Awesome. Sorry.
Awesome. No, that's great. It's like, I'm not really supposed to teach that in this module, but it's really cool stuff. So if you are interested, that's where this work goes, is like actually how you can help people beyond like to actually learn how to move for the first time and those kind of things. It's pretty cool. And how that has an impact on them physiologically and then psychologically and emotionally as well. Any other questions before we do this last little bit? I reckon we're going to finish early unless you have heaps more questions. No? Cool. Oops, I went way too far. Okay, so teaching recommendations here, and I could have taken you through these at the start, but I mean, it's just something to be considerate of if you decide to include any somatic exercises in your SCH, in your practice. When learning the exercises, let go of the correct way to complete the movement so that you can be led to a new place. And I reiterate also here, let go of the outcome, like Miriam said. So it's not important whether you reach the shape or you get to where you think that I was supposed to ask you to get to. It's actually about being in the process of the movement pathway that you learn the most. Listen to the instructions first. Oh, this was actually really supposed to be said before I taught you, sorry. But listen to the instructions before you get up to look, because it's about listening and moving with your own body. Use language with effortless connotations. So this is if you're teaching it. Release, relax, lengthen, fluid flow, float, slow, enjoy, and soft. Put focus on the contracting side. The releasing will take care of itself. don't use the word stretch, as the client will stretch and enact the stretch reflex, which actually inhibits the release. That's a really tricky one because you sometimes know that they're getting a great stretch, but I try very hard not to say the word stretch. Somatics uses inhalation on the effort and exhalation on the lowering, based on the fact that inhalation is a sympathetic nervous system action and therefore has a greater contraction of muscles. The exhalation is a parasympathetic nervous system action and requires less contraction. So often that's like the opposite to what you would think in Pilates. However, the exhale is still on the lift here. But I find that you might have noticed that I reference it a lot in the first half, and then I let it drop back a little bit, because as the exercises become a little bit more complex, I think people just fall into a natural breathing rhythm. I think it's really important for the beginning because you feel that you need that breath a little more, but then I don't let it be so prevalent for the second half. And then always relax movements, or else the contracted muscle between movements, or else the contracted muscle will recontract through the next movement. And don't collapse down at the end of the movement or the muscle will grab again. And enjoy learning the daily cat stretch series and observe how different your body feels. Oops. So this is all the exercises. We're back to the end of the slides. It might be kind of cool to do these together. So these are just other little tricks and trades that he's done that Tracy's included in the module. But if you look at the book, the Thomas Hanna book, if you end up buying it, it's got other stuff too. It's got an X option, and then he does like a somatic walking option. So there's the cat stretch series, and then there's kind of these other little bits that you can pull from. And I'm actually teaching, and I was going to offer you guys to come and join this if you want, if you're interested, but I'm teaching on Tuesdays at 12. I'm teaching a somatic class once a week, and it's online. I wasn't able to teach it in the studio because it's too cold at this time of year. But the pro to us all being in our own homes is it's warm enough and people enjoy moving like this. And you'll find I don't ever teach the cat series as a whole. I did that for you guys today because that's what I'm required to do. But I actually pull parts of it and I work more on like mobile, like moving through the pelvis or moving through the neck, and I will usually take it into a little bit more free movement at the end, depending on the audience. So we'll do these now, and then just know that there's like other things as part of the Thomas Hanna work. So if you're going to do this, I'm going to do the opposite to you. So don't get confused by me. Try to listen to my words. Turn your head to the right. Tilt your head to the right. Raise the right shoulder. Tilt the head backwards. And then reverse out of that. So forward head, drop shoulder, untilt the head, unturn the head. And these are just both supposed to show you ways to release your levator scalp and your upper traps. What I will want you to pay attention to more is, do you suddenly feel like, oh, that's sore? Because that's a little bit of sensory motor amnesia as we're creating a stimulus to have a change. So you can maybe try that to the other side. Turn the head to the left, tilt the head to the left, raise the left shoulder, and then tilt the head backwards. And then reverse out of that. And then the other way is turn the head to the right, tilt the head to the left, raise the left shoulder. And then releasing out of that. Turn the head to the left, tilt the head to the right, raise the right shoulder. And then reverse out of that. These are, I don't know, I think they sort of work, but they don't feel as, some people might get amazing release. I don't feel like they give me quite as much, but see how you go. In a supine position, so laying on your back here, internally rotate the arms with the backs of the hands rested on the thighs and the shoulders to the ceiling, and then release the shoulders back to the floor. So you're doing like an internal rotation of the arms and kind of lifting your shoulders up, holding them there for a moment, and then releasing back towards the floor again. Maybe try 2 more of those. You're getting pectoral and rhomboid release here. So that's the supine version. And then sitting up, The seated version is place the hands on the back of the sacrum. Take the elbows backwards so that the arms aim towards being parallel. So you're getting that squeeze of your shoulder blades, that activation of your rhomboids. And then slowly release. And maybe let your arms drop by your side. You can try that a few times. So you can see that we're moving into a potentially already contracted contraction, feeling that intensity of it, and then releasing out of that. Good. And then it goes through our cat series. So we've done these, but I'll just name them for you. Mobilization is number 1. And I did do like, I did the first few where I just did arch and release, and then I did arch and press. So again, with the Thomas Hanna book, there's a few more like nuances to the work. And so I just sort of went into some of those a little bit as well. Then you've got back release, prone extension. So the back release was the lifting the head and shoulders. Then you go prone extension, head over hand. That's the picture there. Lay on back, head and knee lift. Side muscle release. So where you're lifting the head. Oh, sorry, do you want me to go slower if you're taking photos? All good. And then spinal rotation release. This is the one where you do, so you can have knees together, you can have knees a little wider. I don't think this one has the shoulders in it. Oh yeah, internally rotate one arm and externally rotate the other. So you get the scapula as well. It's really nice, this one. The leg and thigh release. Oh, how did everyone go with that? Did anybody find that really hard? The one where you like lift the leg up and have to do the rotation in and out? Anyone find that? No, everyone not too bad with that one. That was the one where you, I'm just going to turn my light off, it's getting a bit dark. That's the one where you have to do the, like, picking up the foot, and then you also do the rotation inwards, and then you end up doing like the skiing option. I don't know, I just find that one so hard. And I'm not sure if anyone else had that experience, but it's, I've had it, feedback in the past from clients that have a bit of SIJ stuff that feels pretty treacherous, and I know it feels pretty treacherous for me. So just be mindful. I personally find that one probably the most provocative when working with clients as well as in my own body, but see how you go. And then that's that one there. And then the seated rotation where you're in the Z sit with your hand on the shoulder. And there's a lot of different details here. Like here it says put the hand on top of your head and gently move the head left and right. That's in your manual too. And there's also some of that. We didn't do any of that today. We worked more on the eyes and head. That was just because we'd done like 50 minutes and I was like probably starting to have enough of this. But I find when I first taught this course, I taught that work in like 35, 40 minutes. And now I teach it in like 55 an hour because I just felt like it needed longer, like it feels rushed otherwise. So I'd be interested to hear your feedback if you felt it was too drawled on or if you thought that was a good pace, because it is a challenge to kind of set the pace and maintain it throughout and feel like everyone's present in that. That's this one here. And then always repeat number 4. Did anyone notice that we did that? That's just his rule. I don't really know why you do that. I think personally it's a nice way to revisit a previous, it's almost like a movement check-in because you sort of feel the difference as you go. But I think it's also an opportunity to come back into yourself because when you're upright looking around, you're sort of a little bit less internalized. And so he always says in the daily cat stretch series that you repeat number 4. Cool beans. That is all your slides, people. Look at us, an hour and a half in. I never finish this early, so we must be doing something right. But I think it's probably worthwhile offering up the floor to some questions in case anyone's got anything or comments if they want to share some stuff as well.
What time is your class on Tuesday, did you say?
12 p.m. at the moment.
Cool.
Yeah, it's because it's online, it's like $15 for a single class, or if you buy a pack of 5 in Movementality, you get $10 a class, so 5 for $50. And there's not very many people in it at the moment, 2 or 3, but it's just been nice to explore movement somatically. And I do bring in some of the Thomas Hanna work, but definitely also trying to move it to a more free movement class over time. But a few things come into play, like space for people in their houses, but also where we have been a Pilates studio for 15 years. Rob and I have only been in charge for 3, but there's a huge stigma in free movement when you've been teaching a certain way for a certain time. So there's a lot of client perception shift to be done as well, and we're just slowly chipping away at that. So yeah, some people are just not ready to move freely. I offered a free flow somatics class for our birthday, and most of the comments I got was, well, that was weird. So I'm just sort of like, I'm not sure how much of that I'm going to do until I feel more grounded in myself presenting it to. But it was interesting. I got them to explore push and yield as 2 of the developmental movement patterns, because they're kind of on the same spectrum but opposite ends, and got them to move around their space. And there was all these different cues, because I was being pretty kind in the way that I led them. I didn't leave them out in the dark. So it kind of took them through a process of coming up to standing and all of this. But yeah, I think they were all a bit like, that was not what I expected. So it's a journey.
Cool.
I just have to say, don't give up on that, Ash. Like, do you know what? Like, I teach like a 45-minute stretch class a couple of times a week normally, and I get really out there with everyone. Like, close your eyes, tune into this. You know, Vanessa's done it. And I'm like, don't worry about what you think it has to look like. Go into what it feels like and just get people in it. And they leave. And sometimes they can't leave the studio. They sit there for like 45 minutes, and it really brings people into their tenderness. And so you get these conversations with people where sometimes, like, I don't know, Vanessa, if it ever happens to you when you've taught stretch, but like sometimes you're a little bit like, I've got to go now. Like, you know, just because people really open up and they get really settled in their bodies, and they want you to be the person that they continually keep connecting to. And it's like, it's that thing where you're like, I'm really sorry, like, I've got to get home to the babysitter. Like,
That is so somatic. Sometimes I feel like we open something, like I felt this, and I'm like, oh shit, I don't know how to contain this. I'm like, whoa, how do I bring it back? Because there's a huge power in the work, right? So that's so funny that you've had that experience. I've definitely had that too.
But it's awesome. You know, I just, it's like they're at their most powerful in the world when they're like that, because they're not encumbered by outcomes. You know, it's like where your productivity is immense when you're not driving. You're just in yourself, and what you get done is next level. So it's like, I don't know. I tell them to go back out into the CBD at 2:00 on a Friday afternoon. I'm like, go back out there, enjoy your Friday afternoon, take it back into the workplace.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. I think it's so true. You're so powerful when you're.
And in honesty, it's a big lesson as a teacher, isn't it? It's like you have to deal with people telling you that what you're doing is weird. And you're like, is it me that's weird? Or is it the class that's weird? And
I'd say if you feel weird, you're doing it right.
Yeah.
Maybe you guys can join my class, give me a little bit of a buffer.
I think what would be really nice to combine with somatics is, I don't know if you guys have ever done any sound healing before. Yeah.
I've done a little bit.
Yeah, that could be a really beautiful combination, actually, combining sound healing and somatics. I actually wrote that down.
Cool.
Yeah, like get like a didgeridoo in there, or like some singing bowls or something, and do some somatics. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I think that would be really cool.
My,
Maybe you can run a class for us, Brad. I'll do it.
Yeah,
I'm dying for someone to do some somatics. I'm checking in with Tracy. Tracy runs one as well on Thursdays at 5 p.m. So there's another option. Hers is way more, like way less Thomas Hanna, way more movement dance movement therapy. Like I call it somatic movement therapy, but it's dance movement therapy as well. Like, so if you want to explore the other end of it, the second part of what I did in the later course, she's doing a lot more of that. That's really cool too. That's only $15. So if you want that information, I can even put it on the Slack chat.
Yeah, that's cool.
Cool to play around with and just get some experience. But I'm always hunting for people leading this stuff because I'm like, I just want to do it. I like lead it all the time. I just want to do it. Someone else teach me. Like, it feels so good.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, that was awesome. Thank you so much.
So welcome. I hope that it felt still resonating even though you're on a screen. I know it must be hard, but I think you guys are doing a great job that you're pushing through and finding these ways to keep training. And I put an intention out there that you would still have a kick-ass somatic experience. So I hope that you did have that. Cool.
Yeah.
Vanessa, did you want to say something? You went to say something before?
Me?
Yeah, did you go to say something before?
No, I was just nodding.
I would try to say something.
Yes, please say.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah. My stepdad does Feldenkrais. I've been to a couple of classes with him, so I can kind of see where that comes from. But I found this more, I don't know, like more nurturing and just a bit more like softer and smoother than I found what the Feldenkrais was. I think the Feldenkrais, the person who taught it, it was very monotonal and very kind of serious. So it was nice. Yeah, thank you.
Good. That's great. That's good feedback for me. I'm trying to be nurturing, so I'm glad that came across.
And I thought the time, like the length of it was good as well. Like I really liked the fact you gave us a chance to kind of slowly move at our own pace as well.
Yeah, cool. Tracy said something really interesting to me, which has resonated a little bit because it's happened a few times. Like when you do the somatic movement therapy, Laban created all this amazing way to view movement, and then Peggy Hackney, which was like one of his predecessors, wrote this fantastic book. And she's like, it's way easier to understand what Peggy Hackney did than what Laban did. His was just way too out there. And then she was able to condense it down and make it make sense. And I think that's a little bit the same with Feldenkrais. His stuff is amazing, but it's like Thomas Hanna did all this training with him and then went, I know how to make this really succinct and really easily usable for lots of people. And I'm going to create this. And I've done a lot of Feldenkrais too, and I do love it, but I find it's just so expansive and it breaks it down so much that sometimes, like, again, I would a bit fall asleep. And I just think this kind of moves you through a little bit more. You're doing a bit more movement, and I quite liked that about it. So yeah, they're both like, he was the father of it, and Thomas Hanna like idolized Feldenkrais and actually brought him over to the US. And that's how Thomas Hanna was able to found his own training facility, was through Feldenkrais. So he's like massive worshiper of him, but it's just like a slightly different take on the idea. And I also think Feldenkrais is very much rooted in the mechanics of the body, and somatic movement therapy starts there, but it takes it further into it being like physiological experiences to create emotional responses to then change that, go back in the reverse of that. So I just think it takes things a bit further if that's where you wanted to go.
Yeah. Nice.
Anyone else have any questions or comments or want to share anything?
I think you nailed your intention.
Good, thank you. Cool. Guys, you might be getting an early minute. I hope I don't get a slap on the wrist, but I think we got through all the content. So I'm sure Bruce will be all right. I'll give him a call and let him know. If you have any other questions, what I'll do is I'll put my email in the Slack chat. I do check it, but probably not often enough. So I'll put my email there in case I don't get back to you on anything. And I'll put in a reference to the book, the Thomas Hanna book. And I was going to put in a reference to something else. I'll see if I can put in a link to Tracy's classes or a way to access Tracy's classes, because ours are pretty easy. You just go through mind, body to move mentality as if you were going to book a class, and you just book the somatics. But because she's through Tensegrity, I have a link to get there, but I know it's open to anyone. So you're welcome to jump in and try that too. Sound cool? Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. I hope you have a really chilled out weekend and enjoy that space of being in your body. soak it all up. And hopefully I'll see you in the studio at some point. Reach out to me if you have any questions or if you want to clarify anything about your somatic training.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ash.